has been a very big change, I would say, for our partner schools. Our school teachers and head teachers and our fellows has been working in collaboration to build their own skills with distance learning, digital learning, especially supporting students with low resource and no resource community where accessing technology has been a big challenge.
It is our duty and responsibility as an educator and also the community to do whatever it takes to ensure that our kids are safe and continue learning. We're still recruiting more teachers, so we train them and so that they can teach more students during this time, and we also investing for their leadership so that they can foster more leadership in different levels for students, for their whole classroom.
Pre-pandemic, we define access by building more schools, classrooms, and providing facilities and learning materials to our learners. However, the disruption brought by the pandemic triggered the redefinition of education access. We have also seen the evolution of the teaching-learning process. From the typical teacher-student interaction within the classroom, parents now play a critical role in ensuring learning continuity among learners.
During this pandemic, Teacher Bangladesh's top priority has been keeping students safe and keeping learning going on no matter what. We have transferred the full program and fellowship program to online, including the fellow training and their development, and we adapted the distance learning approach for our students' learning.
Our teachers mentioned their experience difficulty in sustaining contact and interaction among some of their students and parents, who also have to grapple with certain realities apart from education like income, access to technology, familial concerns, among others. What does being a teacher really mean in a pandemic? What is teaching if I am not with my students?
Based on our learning from the ground and also from our fellows, we focus on building the fellow skills in how to support students in distance learning approach, how to closely work with communities who are going through so much loss and pain at this point of time.
So to address these challenges that our program participants facing, they keep reflecting and really thinking through on why are they joining this work in the first place. So they really recenter themselves and repurpose themselves. We also see that they also leverage other people's strengths, other fellows, and the teachers, and also the school to cultivate those strengths so that they can keep moving forward with the student.
As an organization, we are very proud and motivated to work closely with the next generation of leaders when a nation is going through such a significant change, and working beside the young population who are going to change and move this work forward.
Despite all this truth and reality, we see new possibility that we as an organization to work with other people, other partners to bring in new opportunity and the new learning experience for our students to keep moving forward, to ensure that they keep still engaging in the learning process during this time. So this is really exciting me the most, that we are the community, we are educators, we are teachers, and we are also the frontliner to the education.
Whenever teachers report or share stories and anecdotes of how excited their students and parents are in joining our programs, or when their co-teachers excitedly open and use the printers that our partners have donated for them to print modules, these are some of the stories that motivate us to continue, because it demonstrates that there is interest and willingness to continue education even amid this uncertain time. We celebrate our partners from the Department of Education, the local government units, our teachers, students, and parents who joined us in a year of learning amid the pandemic.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to Frontlining Education, a virtual forum exploring teacher quality amid these challenging times, or these changing times. I'm Angel Jacob, your host for this afternoon. As you saw from our earlier video, today's forum will feature the education context of 3 countries in Asia, namely Bangladesh, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Last year, with the support of the Asian Development Bank, Teach for the Philippines, together with Teach for Bangladesh and Teach for Cambodia, ran a study exploring teacher quality in each of their countries amid the COVID-19 crisis. Today, you can expect to discover what similarities and differences exist in these 3 countries, and what we can take as the best practices from each to arrive at our end goal, which is to provide appropriate policy and program support for public school teachers. But before we get into that, let's get to know each other first, virtually. I would like to know how everyone is doing. I hope everyone is doing well and you've had a little bit of lunch or maybe even snacks. So to do this, to check up on each other, let's go to mentimeter.com. Please go to mentimeter.com, type the code you see on your screen, or if you have your mobile phone with you, please select your response. Again, our website or the code to use is the QR code flashed on your screen, or please go to menti.com. All right. Once again, we'd like to know how everyone is feeling this afternoon. I understand we have a lot of educators and education workers here. And while you're at it, at menti.com, please let us know which sector you represent. If you're from the corporate sector, the private, government, if you are from the public sector, or if you represent the academe. Thank you very much. Okay, we would like to thank all our attendees for making time to join us this afternoon. Again, a gentle reminder to let all of us know how you're feeling and what you look forward to in today's event by going to menti.com. Once again, type in the code you see on your screen and select your response. Okay, I hope we can continue being engaged for the next few hours, around 3 to be exact, as we embark on a journey to learn and understand the challenges our dear teachers experienced during the pandemic school year. What kind of support do they need to adapt to the changing education landscape? And why is it critical to focus on teacher quality in ensuring that children benefit from quality education? To start off this learning journey, I'd like to call on Teach for the Philippines CEO and co-founder Clarissa Delgado to officially open today's event.
Welcome, everybody. We're very glad to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us in this important event for Teach for the Philippines. Thank you too to our speakers for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us on our panels and to help move forward with our dialogue about education quality in our beloved country. COVID has been an unprecedented challenge, not just for this year, but across our lifetimes. I think the true cost of COVID, though, has been on its effect on our timeline for focusing on education quality. In 2019 December, the DepEd launched their focus on education quality. Unfortunately, by March of that same year, we had gone into the full enhanced community quarantine, and you know the rest of how 2020 and most of 2021 has played out. So, in spite of all of the challenges, we have continued to invest our time, effort, and resources doing our part to keep the light shining on education quality while all of our allies and the system itself figured out how to get access back up and running. And I think that's what true partnerships are about. We can't do everything by ourselves, and so we all need to pitch in where we can. And that's what today's event is about. The year that we've spent working hard behind the scenes to keep the light shining on education quality and to keep laser focused on what it takes to improve learning outcomes in our country. But see, it's not just about our country. Through the generosity of the Asian Development Bank, we were able to reach across our waters and join forces with esteemed colleagues in Cambodia and in Bangladesh, because we find that solutions can be similar. With that, I would like to welcome you all to this event, and I sincerely share that I look forward to the dialogue we have today, but also to the dialogue we will continue to have in the succeeding days as we learn from each other, not just here in the Philippines, but in Cambodia and Bangladesh, and as we continue to have these very important conversations about what it will take to get our students learning and to keep them learning. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Clarissa, for the hopeful and warm welcome. With that, let's begin today's forum, which will focus on 3 questions that are addressed in this study. We will have presentations and succeeding panel discussions for each of these questions, wherein we have invited key leaders and policymakers and implementators from Bangladesh, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Please feel free to send in your questions during the panel discussion, and you can do them via Zoom, the Zoom question and answer box, or the Facebook Live video comments section. Again, please feel free to send in your questions or your thoughts and comments via the Zoom question and answer box or the Facebook Live video comments section. Panelists, I'm sure, will be so happy to answer all of them later on. Moderating all 3 of the panel segments is Teach for the Philippines Chief Operations Officer, Mavi Unco. Mavi has been with Teach for the Philippines since 2016 and has since led the organization's data and impact assessment team. She also led the team that implemented the study we are presenting this afternoon. Let's all welcome the lovely Mavi Unco. Hi, Mavi.
Hi, Angel. It's great to be here. I hope you're doing well.
I am. Thank you very much. How have you been?
I am doing well as well. I'm very excited for this afternoon's event. I can't wait to hear from all the folks that we have on the panel, hear from the presenters. I think it's such an important topic that we're trying to talk about today, that we want to talk about today, supporting teachers in crisis times, figuring out the best way forward. So I'm just really psyched and really, really excited to be here.
You mentioned hearing from all our guests, our attendees, our colleagues for today. Speaking of that, we would like to hear from them. They can do that, or they can share their thoughts with us, Mavi, by going to menti.com. Again, that is menti.com. Type the code you see on your screen and please provide your response. Like what Mavi said, she's very excited to get to know everyone today and hear from them and learn from them as well. And as the attendees, we would, I myself consider, I know I'm a host, but I'm also an attendee wanting to learn more about how effective, teachers feel about themselves with their students during times like this. It's a very challenging time, but we must move forward and we must continue with our advocacy.
No, I agree, Angel. And I think, no one can deny how challenging the past year has been. People have had to reimagine the way they do everything in their lives, right? The lockdowns, the quarantines, it's taken a toll on a lot of people, including and especially the ones working in education. There's been no face-to-face classes, at least in the Philippines, since the pandemic started. And so it would be great to hear from people on the ground, people who are really closest to education work, and see, what insights they've learned from such a difficult, but also, I guess, a big learning year for all of us.
Mhm. And again, the challenges the teachers face, the students face as well. Can you imagine the kids wanting to see their classmates, wanting to even hug their teachers and thank their teachers, and they're not able to do that, and vice versa. So even if virtually, we can feel the love, we can feel the drive to continue and to learn from the students, and of course students learning from the teachers. So this afternoon will be so exciting as we hear from all our panelists and again our attendees. And again, to better understand how we can move forward in supporting our teachers, let's first find out. Let me cut myself there. Okay, we're finding out the some of the results from menti.com from our attendees. Thank you very much. Mostly to learn about how to deal with the new normal in education. Very interesting, Mavi. The word normal, it has taken on an entirely different meaning. What does the new normal, briefly, Mavi, before we get into our first panel, what to you is the new normal? And maybe our attendees can answer that as well.
Oh my gosh, that's such a big phrase, Angel. I don't even know where to begin, but at least in the context of our work in Teach for the Philippines, the context of our work in education, I think just the physical proximity to students is something that's changed. Our fellows remain in the communities that they're assigned to, so that's a big help to us. But just being able to see their students every day in the classroom, that's something that's changed dramatically. The role that parents now have to take in the education of their children very directly, that also needed to be reimagined. I imagine we have a few parents in the attendees and even among the panelists, and they can speak to the challenges that they've also had to face, the stretch that they've had to do, right? As someone who now has to teach their kids directly or their children directly. I'm also interested to hear that there's one response in particular from Mentimeter asking about the students. Kamusta na ang mga mag-aaral? So someone asked that in Filipino. I thought that was a very, very important question to ask, and maybe a response that everyone would benefit from hearing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mavi. And with that, we move on to our first panel discussion with our esteemed guests, our policy leader from Cambodia, Dr. Sopek Song, Director of the Central for Educational Research and Innovation of Cambodia Development Resource Institute, or CDRI. He has managed a number of educational research projects focusing on teaching and learning, workforce development, and professional education. Next, our school head from the Philippines, Dr. Maria Cristina Robles. Dr. Robles is the principal of Navotas High School in the Philippines and has worked in the academe for 23 years. Dr. Robles has championed the improvement of teaching styles and strategies for 21st century learners through the award-winning project MCART, which engages many students to learn using multimedia resources. Presenting findings of the study is Shweb Alam, Chief of Staff at Teach for Bangladesh, along with Maliha Fauzia, Director of Program at Teach for Bangladesh, to represent the civil sector context. Welcome to all our panelists. And to start off our first panel, let's hear from our students and teachers in this short video.
Economic downfall has pushed many of the families to return to village homes. So while I was trying to provide learning support for my students, some of the parents were worried about managing meals for the next day, maybe. In fact, after in the new normal, the inequity is clearly visible.
অনেক মনে পড়ে, কারণ আমার অনেক বন্ধু ছিল, তাদের সাথে অনেক মজা করতাম। তারপর আমার প্রিয় ম্যাম মরিয়ম, ওদের সাথে অনেক সবার সাথে মজা করতাম অনেক।
We used to meet each other in physically in the classroom, and now we only talk to each other in the phone in front of the screen. And especially during this time, it's like the internet access is not really stable for everyone and everywhere.
Well, the most thing that I miss about going to school is, that when I go to school, I can hang out with my friends and do a lot of things with them.
Marami talagang pinabago ang school year na to sa mga nakaraang school years. Kung dati, masiglang-masigla ang aming paaralan dahil sa dami ng mga estudyante pumapasok, ngayon naman ay nababalutan ito ng katahimikan. Kung dati mayroong face-to-face learning, ngayon nakabase na lamang ang pag-aaral ng mga bata sa kanilang mga self-learning modules. At minsan din ay pagkakaroon ng online classes.
There have been actually many challenges, and one of the most mentionable challenge is actually the lack of digital literacy and digital devices. Many parents do not have smartphones, and even those who have do not have adequate knowledge about Zoom, Google Meet, or the virtual world we are talking about.
It's quite challenging for me to make sure that the assessment that I'm using is quite effective or not, because we're not so sure whether students who did really complete the assessment by themselves or someone else do it for them.
Siguro yung pinaka-challenging nung una was launching yung functional literacy program. Kasi nga, we had to find students na beginner level yung reading. And since yung setup na yun, hindi sila makapasok sa school, we had to reach out to them one by one.
I am the one actually who can ensure the learning of my students. And if I stop today, many of my students might drop out, many more might suffer from learning gap. But despite all those challenges, they are trying their utmost to keep their learning ongoing. And if they are trying, why not me?
What motivates me to teach despite this pandemic is I think the empathy that I have toward the student and their future. I understand that the student during this time must feel overwhelmed and confused what is going on with them, and it's like they kind of not sure what is the next step.
What motivates me the most to keep learning and studying is my parents. I have a lot of dream jobs. Like I also want to be a photographer, an artist, and I'm also interested in teaching as well.
What remains the same is the passion and commitment of the teachers to reach out to the students and the perseverance of the students to continue their studies amidst the pandemic.
Thank you, Aditya Borwa, Fidor Sierros, Dwayne Garcia, Shadman Absar Chode, Hey Charya, Leah Linyaton, and Zar Nationalis, our teachers and students from Bangladesh, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Good morning from Dhaka, everyone. My name is Shoaib Alam, and I work at Teach for Bangladesh. Today, I will be walking you through a brief overview of what education was like in my country before the start of the pandemic, and some lessons we learned about what education is like for teachers, students, and families during the COVID crisis as well. Next slide, please. Let's move on to the next slide. And the one right after. Thank you. What you see on the screen right now is a brief overview of Bangladesh's education system by numbers. I hope something you're noticing is the scale of education in Bangladesh. We have about 18 million students in our primary sector alone, making us one of the largest education systems in the world. Now, Bangladesh has kept schools closed since March. That's more than a year that schools have been closed. So I hope the other thing you're taking away is a scale of the challenge for learners and as well as for teachers in our country. This truly is a defining moment in our history. If we do not act now, there will be implications for generations to come in our country. Next slide, please. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of the major successes that Bangladesh has had in education over the last 3 decades. We have increasingly improved access to education for children, particularly in primary school, where about 98% of students are now enrolled. We have also improved on access to education for girls. In most sectors, girls now outnumber boys in schooling, though dropout levels remain high. Next slide, please. Now, before the start of the pandemic, there were challenges in our education. We were not reaching 100% of all kids. As I mentioned, dropout rates remained high before the pandemic, and there were high incidences of child marriage and child labor as well. Now, if you look at the right-hand side of this deck, you will also see another big challenge for our education system, which was on the quality of education. Study after studies have shown that Bangladeshi children complete education without the basic competencies required in the contemporary workforce. For example, a 2018 study by the World Bank found that out of the first 11 years of schooling a child can expect to receive in Bangladesh, students lose up to 4.5 years of actual learning. This means ultimately that the level of human capital in the country is low, and our citizens are denied access to lifelong learning opportunities. Now, the challenges that we're seeing on the screen right now are significantly worsened by the COVID crisis, as well as the achievements we've had are now significantly threatened by this ongoing crisis. Next slide, please. These are the same statistics as before in a little bit more detail. Let's move on to the next slide. As I mentioned before, the COVID crisis began in our country in March of last year. Since then, we have shifted to different modalities of learning over television, over radio, the internet, and over mobile phones. Now, for our families and households, this means adjusting to a new set of responsibilities to ensure learning continuity that families did not have in 2019. And for our teachers, it means working with communities that face significant barriers to education, to accessing distance learning, and working with communities where there is a high incidence of economic instability, where potentially learning is becoming less and less of a priority as families try to cope with the ongoing crisis. As I've shared with you before, a lot of our successes in education are now threatened, and a lot of our challenges are increasingly exacerbated. Moving on to the next slide. So through this study, we asked households and families and teachers, as well as students, questions about what the current reality is like for learning in their environment. And we found several interesting realities that teachers and students are facing, and I would like to walk you through them right now. Let's move on to the next slide. The first thing we asked our learners as well as our teachers is the environment from which they're working and accessing learning. Of course, schools are closed, which means learners are primarily working from home, as are many teachers. Here's what we saw. Next slide. When we spoke to families and households across the 3 countries, we found that about 41% of learners were accessing distance learning in communal or shared spaces. 47% had dedicated spaces for learning, and about 12% had none. Now, one thing that was common across the 3 countries was that our respondents lived in relatively crowded homes. We found that there were about 5 members per home in each of our countries. And more than 50% of households mentioned that they experienced some form of disruption in their surroundings. In my context, it's often noise pollution from the road outside, from construction sites, from people walking by. There's a lot of challenges and distractions when you're sitting down and trying to work. So even when you have a dedicated learning space, it doesn't mean that you're always able to concentrate in that space. Next slide, please. We found a similar reality for teachers who, during the course of the study, were splitting their time in most countries, and in fact, in almost 3 countries, between working from schools and working from home. In Bangladesh, we found that over half of our teachers reported working from a communal space. What you see on the right-hand side is a picture of a Teach for Bangladesh fellow who set up this little studio in his home to be able to broadcast lessons to students. Now, again, for teachers who are trying to reach students and maintain learning continuity during the crisis, a big question we have to ask is, where are they working from, and do they have the right environment from which to be able to reach their learners? Next slide, please. Now, we learned a little bit about the environment from which learners and teachers are accessing learning during this crisis. The next question, of course, is, do they have access to technology? Next slide, please. And here's what we found. There were high levels of mobile penetration across all 3 countries, but penetration of smartphones varied. In Bangladesh, about 40% of respondents had access to a smartphone. The numbers were 63% in the Philippines and 91% in Cambodia. Now, from our experience, what we know is simply having access to a smartphone does not mean that a child will be able to utilize it for the purposes of learning. In Bangladesh, typically the smartphone belongs to an earning member, a parent, or an older sibling who's not at home all day. The other question is, of course, whether families can afford internet to be able to use the smartphones. And in our country, we've also found that being able to afford stable internet for the purposes of learning can be a significant challenge for families in need. We found similar trends for the use for internet penetration. And then finally, at the bottom of the slide, you can look at the varying levels of tech savviness. Now, in Bangladesh and in Cambodia, families reported relatively low levels of tech savviness, which is defined as the ability to log onto a phone and access apps. But in the Philippines, we found high levels of tech savviness, with about 82% of families saying they have at least one member who is able to use a phone and access apps. From the perspective of teachers, but particularly in our program, having someone in the household of a child who's able to access mobile phones and able to connect the child to the internet is actually a boon. It saves the teacher time and effort in being able to connect to the child. So tech savviness, having someone at home who can access mobile phones is actually a very important factor. That is one thing we found in our experience in the last year or so. Next slide, please. We also spoke to teachers about their access to technology, and what we found is majority of teachers across the 3 countries had access to smartphones, and access to internet and access to devices, including computers, were also relatively high. Next slide, please. Now, you have access to technology, you have the environment from which to work. Are you comfortable using that technology for the purposes of teaching? That's a question we posed to our teachers, and here's what we found. Moving to the next slide. When we asked teachers to rate their level of comfort with using technology, just generally, they rated themselves on a scale of 1 to 5, by the way. They rated themselves at 4. But when we asked them, are you able to use technology for the purposes of teaching? That fell to 3.5. Now, what we're finding in our context is teachers are comfortable using technology and mobile phones for mobile banking, for social media, however, are not as comfortable using their phones for the purposes of learning. In our context, using technology is not part of the lived experience of teachers. They have not used it before for their own learning, and it is something that they're learning to do now. And that is, of course, something that we're seeing reflected on this slide. Let's move on to the next slide. The other big factor, the other big stakeholder in learning crisis and trying to maintain learning continuity from home is who is at home, who is working with the student at home to enable learning continuity to happen. So we asked parents and guardians, are they able and willing to support students with learning at home? And here's what they had to say. Let's move on to the next slide. In Bangladesh, the majority of families reported having at least one member, now typically a mother or an older sibling, who is both willing and available to be able to teach the children at home. But they had some concerns. Amongst those, the biggest ones were lack of knowledge, concerns about their ability or their skills to teach, and having the time to do so. Now keep in mind, parents in our communities are facing the challenge on multiple levels. They're facing high levels of economic instability, they're facing high levels of stress, losing family members, etc., all of which impact parents' ability to be able to work with their children. That said, we have seen parents are incredibly concerned about their children's learning during this time, and across our households, we've noticed a willingness for parents to adapt and to be able to sit with children. Something that we have seen in Bangladesh, for example, on our Google Meet classes is our parents are very much in our virtual classrooms with us. They may not be on camera, but we can see them, we can feel them sitting next to the child somewhere in the room. And of course, if you're a teacher, you know that sometimes you ask a question, the child doesn't give you the correct response, and you work with the child to get to where you need to get. But parents, we've noticed, get very stressed out during those times. They're prompting, they will often tell teachers, hey, my child is not answering your question. So of course, we have realized parents are incredibly important stakeholders for us. And sometimes, it's helpful to also just include them in the teaching learning process, because you are now, if you're a teacher in our context, parents are very much in the classroom with you. Next slide, please. We asked households the types of barriers that they faced, and here's what we saw. Barriers to, of course, accessing distance learning during times of crises, and here's what they had to say. Next slide, please. What you see on the screen is a representation of families that are facing one or more barriers to learning. The families that are facing barriers are represented in red dots, and families that are not facing barriers are represented by blue dots. Of the total number of families surveyed, the majority, 58%, said that they're facing 1 to 3 barriers to distance learning. Barriers include access to technology, access to the internet and smartphone, as well as noise pollution, and so on. Now, there is a small percentage of families who reported that they're not facing some of these barriers when it comes to accessing distance learning. However, it's important to keep in mind that even when you have the learning environment, you have a mobile phone, you have an internet, this is not the way in which families and households are used to, to students learning. This is something that they're having to adapt, which remains a significant challenge. Even if you are one of those blue families that is not facing these significant challenges, you are still having to learn to adapt to distance learning during this time of crisis. And you can read more about it in the knowledge product, of course. Next slide, please. Finally, we had talked to teachers about their concerns, their pandemic concerns, and their lived reality, and here's what they had to say. We can move on to the next slide, please. And here's what they had to say. What you see on the screen is a visual representation of the types of concerns and the relevance of those concerns to teachers. Teachers are concerned about their safety and well-being, the safety and well-being of their family and friends, the learning continuity of their students, as well as the state of the economy, their income, food security, and so on. Next slide, please. Now, in this study, we found that teachers are facing fewer barriers to distance learning than our households are, and they have higher levels of tech savviness and ability to access technology for learning. That said, something to keep in mind is that teachers are not only experiencing the crisis in their personal lives, they are experiencing this crisis through the lives of their students and families that they serve. In our context, if you're a teacher in Bangladesh, you are talking to children who are calling you and talking to you about the challenges they're facing, food insecurity, disconnection from family and friends, the inability to go outside and play. You are absorbing that every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. When you're talking to parents about their challenges, about the economic instability, about their stresses, their concerns for their kids. So teachers are definitely absorbing all of this in addition to the personal challenges that they're facing in their own lives. So it's important, something that we have learned in the study is that you cannot remove the teacher from their context. We have to consider what teachers are going through as we operationalize distance learning. It's important to understand the pressures that exist for them, not just in the classroom, but also outside. Well, the distance learning classroom, but outside as well. The teacher is a whole person, and we need to consider that when we are operationalizing distance learning in times of crises. Moving on to the next slide, please. So in summary, to recap what I've said, one thing we definitely anticipate is that if we do not act, the pandemic will exacerbate existing challenges, not just in Bangladesh, but in our partner countries in Cambodia and the Philippines as well. We found that there is an emerging opportunity to use existing technology and to add additional technology use to aid support and to aid and support learning. Of course, there is a requirement of mindset and behavior change amongst all stakeholders involved. Finally, the final message that we're trying to share with you is that a holistic understanding of children's and teachers' lived realities and their context is really, really important in being able to inform and strengthen learning during crises. That is it for me. Thank you so much for listening. I will now hand things over to Mavi to lead us into the panel.
Thank you so much, Shweb. At this point, let's hear from our panelists on their thoughts around the findings that we heard from Shweb, but also the AVP, the voice of the students, the teachers that we spoke to from the ground, and how these have been reflected in their respective countries. Joining us from Cambodia is Dr. Sophiak Song, Director at the Center for Educational Research and Innovation, Cambodia Development Resource Institute, or CDRI. Dr. Song, what stood out for you in the presentation? Oh, Dr. Sophiak, I think there's a problem with the audio. Can we mind testing it?
Yeah, excuse me. Okay.
There you
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yes, Sophiak from Cambodia. Well, actually, there are several interesting points about the study. But first, let me just congratulate the teams of the three countries that are able to come together and put this interesting study together. Yes, the first thing that I would like to make is that the study tend to point out is the changes in the environment, in the setting, in the educational setting. As we can see now, school are closed, lessons are no longer based at school, but it's move away and enter the homes. So in the pre-crisis period, there is a clear divisions between teachers and parents. In Cambodia, you know, culturally we give all the educational responsibility to teachers or to our monks in the past, Buddhist monk. And now there is less. It is less clear about the roles of the homes and the community and the teachers. Actually, parents is now asking teachers, why you are giving me the teacher's role? Why you are giving me the teacher's roles? This is a big question. And actually, in the city, especially in Phnom Penh, where kids, where students go to private school, a lot of parents is refusing to pay school fee because they say that I am the teachers now, or at least I am playing a big role in teaching my kids. So the role is really blurred now. That that it is not the teacher only that teach. The parents is now who are able to work or to do their business now have to divide time and educate their kids. So yeah, that is one thing. There is really a change of roles and a big question how we of course teachers we need to support teachers in order to Okay, kind of interruption. Of course, we need to support teachers due to the sudden shift to online. So they need to get used to the digital materials or the educational device that would help them. But at the same time, I think there is a real need to 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 teach parents or the community to raise awareness that the roles has been changed, and especially in Cambodia, parents and community have to do more to have to support students' learning. And for one thing that I can see in Bangladesh, and somehow I think it can be a good lesson for Cambodia, is that you have a communal space where student, I don't know what it means, but I would take it to mean like a space where students in one village or in a blocks can gather with some facilitator or teachers to help them. That would be a great idea, because I don't think this exists yet in Cambodia, as since the pandemic started more than a year ago. School has been closed, and because school are taken for a quarantine place or quarantine centers. So yeah, school has not yet able to be reopened. So having such a communal space where small group of students can learn with a guide or with a facilitator would be a great idea. That's one thing. And another thing is about the having also stressed by the study is about access to smartphones versus access to educational device. And having connectivity, internet connection, and versus having educational capacity. What I can understand from the study is that, well, I kind of agree with the study, because at CDOI, at our research center, we also have a survey error about COVID impact for students, but at higher level, at higher education. And we can see that more than 90% of the family have access to smartphones and internet connections. But having, but as you mentioned, smartphones, I mean, it's not, I mean, it can be, if it is used well, used as an educational a device. So I think we need to distinguish from this, having access to a smartphone and other device, like, I mean, students or study friendly device like computers, iPads, or other non-digital device as well, because as we mentioned, students, I mean, it is mentioned earlier in the video of the group of the team that we cannot be online all the time. These really caused social, emotional impact. So we need to have the home prepared for educational digital device, as well as having other materials like books or plays if it is for kids. And another one is, which I also tend to agree with the study, is the ability of the households to use digital device for educational purpose. Yeah, one contrasting finding and very interesting I just like to highlight is that Cambodia topped the 3 countries in terms of access to smartphone and internet connection, but bottom stay at the bottom for willingness to teach. Or the capacity to use the tech savvy, the tech savviness is also very, very low. So this is really a difference between access and capacity, and I think we Cambodian people, stakeholder especially, have to pay attention to this. And I think maybe this is actually the three countries are kind of really culturally different. We are very diverse. Cambodia is really follow a tradition where we give, like I say, teachers is everything. So when I mean the home play very little roles in educating the kids, and but now the setting is really different, and we need to raise the awareness and to get ready to push the home and the community to join in the education as well. Well, it's my time now.
Yes.
Okay, thank
that's
you.
about the time we have for your reaction, but thank you so much. I appreciate that you pulled out all those different insights, and actually it's really interesting to hear that you see, you know, kind of this, there's similar themes that run across, you know, our three countries, no matter how different our contexts are. One thing that you mentioned that really jumped out at me was, you know, the reimagined role of parents, and parents kind of pushing back on this because of how difficult it also is. And then that also being a challenge that now teachers have to deal with, contend with, on top of their teaching duties, on top of the auxiliary work that they typically do. So at this point, I'd like to ask our school head, our principal from the Philippines, Dr. Maria Cristina Robles. Ma'am, as someone who works very closely with teachers, who I imagine has a lot of interactions with parents in the past year since the pandemic started, would you care to share your thoughts about how teachers have navigated this and what it's been like for them?
Good afternoon to everyone. Sometimes changes, challenges due to disruptions like this pandemic come to prepare us to something new, useful, and relevant. What is important is the need to increase our will and determination to adapt and move on to carry out plans to a higher plane, to gain more experience and better prepared our perspective for improvement. The principal, with in the context of a crisis or no crisis, will have to continue moving on to make improvements. And the big question is, how do we focus on this one big aspect? How to do things differently in this time of the pandemic? How do we advise the community, the parents, the teachers, and the students to adjust, to adapt, and adopt to this situation? So, as I have said, as a school head, there can be agile and innovative activities that we can do, presented in 4 aspects. How do we make the education system together with the standards work? Well, the principal can see alignment of her strategic scheme and planning methods to the standards of the system. Life-changing measures can be adapted. Flexible trends and practices can be done. Addressing the needs of the teachers, the parents, and the students is also one way. There can be adoption of the curriculum interventions and improvements for all types of learners. The diverse needs of the learners can be answered or catered to through learner-focused activities, adopting the whole school approach that we have as what we have done in the school, cross-curricular integration to lessen academic ease. Based on a study we have conducted, the parents were overwhelmed with the fact that they will be also teaching. The teachers are suffering from overlapping activities as a teacher and as a mother at home. And the students were found to have lost their sense of time. Now, what does a principal have to do in here? He has to do things differently, as I've said. Adapting the situation to the crisis we are now will make the principal see activities that are aligned with the plans together with that of the DepEd, and so operationalization of this at the school level. Collaboration and asking the cooperation of the teachers who were oriented, retooled, reskilled, and upskilled in these activities is also another factor. Though we have the same problems as mentioned by our moderator, we can do things differently, as I've said. Addressing problems at the household level, receiving feedback from the parents, teachers, and students, balancing play and learning in the curriculum, training for preparedness on the part of the teachers, adherence to protocols, so that safety, well-being of the students will be taken into consideration. So these are just some of the activities that I think the principal should focus on. Working together with the teachers, adopting, as I've said, that holy school approach of cross-curricular integration that we are doing in the school, 8 subject areas with only one assessment tool, and then the teachers who were definitely given more chances to adapt innovations on their own, the parents who are oriented and enticed that things can be done, convincing them that we are working hard for the sake of the children, and letting them know that because we love the children, we can make them more informed of our targets, of our plans, and the initial results of the initiatives taken by the leadership together with the parents, the community, and the teachers. So assuring them that there can be balance, the interfacing of activities, there can be an interplay of different projects, programs, activities aligned with that of the DepEd. As I've said, operationalized at the school level and participated in by all types of stakeholders, whether external or internal, is the main activity of a principal. The principalship, which is relational, meaning to say there can be that way of letting the teachers feel that you need them, that you empower them because you trust them, and most especially because you love them. And this is clearly seen from the common, problems presented to us by the presenter a while ago. While there can be problems, there can still be hope. Things can be done cooperatively, collaboratively, so that manifestation at the school level, how students learn, translation into action, that truly there is teaching and learning, and that we are able to monitor and see how teachers work, well, that is the main activity of education in the Philippines. Do I have some more time? Okay, so much. I think that is the idea that I got from the presentation of the first presenter.
Thank you so much, Doc Tins. I think you took us on quite a journey, just in under 5 minutes, I would say. There's so many things that I learned from what you shared, and I'd like to take the opportunity later to deep dive into some of those things. Things that jumped out at me were, first of all, when you talked about will and determination, the thing that came to mind really was building a mindset, right? Building a mindset and an agency among our teachers, helping them to realize that there are things that we can do, and that, with enough perseverance and tenacity, we can overcome challenges. Another thing that jumps out is the need for flexibility and creative solutions, exploring things that maybe we've never had to do before, but the situation now warrants, right? Or now requires. And then I guess the other thing is trust, building trust with parents, assuring them that you're there with them every step of the way. And the last thing that really resonated with me was just the knowledge and the hope and the optimism that things can be done, that not everything is lost. At this point, I want to ask the program director of Teach for Bangladesh, Maliha Fauja. Maliha, is this something that resonates with you in your experience in Bangladesh and running programs for your organization?
Thank you, Mavi, for having me here. And this is something really, really resonates with me. What Shoaib has just presented, and also what Dr. Song has shared and what Dr. Robles has just shared. I think just to share that I think over last year, we have learned that parents have been working really hard during this pandemic to support the children. As we all agree, the role of the parents has significantly shifted overnight. This Tuesday, in fact, I was talking to a parent, Mrs. Nargis, and she was sharing her experience during this time. And she shared with me how frustrated she was during the school closure, having no idea what to do with her son, who was also very disengaged and frustrated equally with her, being at home all the time and having no connection with the school or teacher. And also, Mrs. Nargis was questioning if continuing to invest in this education really makes sense right now, if it's a priority for her family. And with her limited knowledge, she was totally not equipped enough to support her son. And when our teachers started reaching out and closely worked with Mrs. Nargis to help her skill, not only her son, so she felt like she was supported. She felt like she has somebody to share her frustration. And this has helped her as well to learn a lot about building the confidence that how can I support my son at home when he is taking online classes, going through this online distance learning experiences. And what we have learned through these experiences and examples of working with our communities and parents that what Dr. Song has just shared, that not only having access is one important aspect, but also I think what we have learned that building that shared skill with our parents, with our community builds the confidence. Yes, distance learning at home is possible. I am confident and I have enough support to support my kids to learn at home. And also, this has brought our communities and us much more closer than ever. And also, we have seen a lot of potential dropouts were prevented during this time by this different collaboration between community and teachers. On the other hand, if we talk about a little bit about teachers' experience, teachers' determination wheel, and what they are learning and what we are learning about teacher development and training, and what with our teachers' experience, we're constantly learning with our teachers as they navigate through this unique circumstances, something that we have never seen before. And we found out that it's really important that we accept that we need to be more agile, more open with teacher training and teacher development. And how we have seen it before will not really work right now. We need to be more open to receive suggestions from teachers and parents, because parents are now also sharing a role of teaching learning at home. So they are learning a lot of what works, what doesn't work, and taking parents' suggestions, teacher suggestions in actually innovating the teacher training process has been really, really useful and insightful for us. Yeah, so as access to education continues to be a big challenge, I think at the same time we learn building shared skill among our parents and teachers and how to support during this time. Being agile has significantly shown a big change for us, especially digital divide when continues to widen the gap far more than ever. So yeah.
Thank you, Maliha. So I really appreciated your note about continuing to invest in education, capacity building for parents, really leaning into that, right, and leveraging that as an opportunity to support students whom you may not have the opportunity to interact with directly as much given the school closures, and the importance of teacher development and training, and also investing in that and not forgetting that teachers as a resource, as an important resource crucial to our success in education in a pandemic time is something to be taken seriously, something to direct resources to. I'd like to stay a little bit on the subject of how teachers are dealing with the current challenges, how they're grappling with the current situation. I'd like to ask Doc Tins, in your experience as a school head, a principal in Navotas National High School, what are specific examples of measures or maybe programs that you've launched in your school to help support teachers who now find themselves with not just having to not just being accountable to student learning, but also having to manage these different and competing priorities in such a chaotic time?
At Navotas National High School, we have that school dictum of inform, involve, and inspire. In the process of informing them, I let the teachers know the basic education learning continuity plan mandated by DepEd for us to do and follow. And then in the process of involve, we learn together the things that we have to do, especially at this time of the pandemic, that teaching, learning processes will have to change and be adaptable to the needs of the children. I have found out that informing them, telling them that these are the things to be done in advance so that they will not be shocked of the too many things they think are being asked of them. And also working closely to them, telling them that I cannot do the things alone, that I need their help. And so, as I've said, empowering them and trusting them of these things to be done, especially when we launched that cross-curricular integration with integrative assessment, harmonizing all the activities of the different 8 subject areas and giving only one form of assessment for the students, which was a project of the division, which we operationalized as the school. And their initial inputs and results showed that it works well because it lessened the time load and the teachers were able to work collaboratively with one another, and the students are not doing so many pages of modules because of the intervention activity worksheets that are aligned with this cross-curricular integration that we have been doing. And also that aspect of inform, involve, and inspire. In the process of inspiring them, I let them submit activities that they think and I have found out to work well with the students. Or would you believe they are following up the students at any time of the day just to know if they were able to do the activities required of them? And then they were the ones inspiring them to make use of the USB OTG that we're using for our online blended learning during the first and second grading. On the third, we are into online learning already because, they have prepared these cross-curricular integrative materials that made a way for us to apply academic ease, wherein students are no longer overwhelmed with so many modules to do. And I have seen that one school head leading 160 teachers who are empowered to suggest different ways of monitoring the children, checking the attendance, submitting outputs, low-tech, no-tech, and high-tech, meaning to say even if there are families without gadgets, well, lesson plans are adjusted to their needs, something like that. And these were done by the teachers because they know from the very start what are the plans included, activities included in the plan, the implementation plan that they see and apply because they are part of the planning, something like that. These are things that I have seen. That's why I have learned that working with them, telling them these are the things to be done, empowering them by teaching them. Like, for example, action research in our school. 100% of them are doing action research. Why? Because the principal does action research. The department heads do action research. And we have cascaded down the writing of action research down to the level of the students. We have just concluded the third research congress for grade 8 students in participation. We have finished with grade 10 and grade 9. So next year we will start with grade 7. Because what I believe that whatever the leadership and the department heads know, they can do this in a whole school approach, involving everyone. No one is left behind, so to speak, and that everyone's work is, being recognized and given attention, something like that. And translation into action. How do we make the students really know these things? Are they makakalikasan, makajos, makabansa or something? Together with the help of the parents who would see through the checklist we have provided them at the start of the classes that where are they into? Are they doing this? To to help each other? Are they, these are example of things that we have seen that work well with the parents, the teachers, and the students. Inform, involve, and inspire them. We make things simple. Our other dictum is simplify your work, but amplify your impact.
Thank you, Dr. So I love that dictum. Inform, involve, inspire. I think I'm going to borrow that and use that for my own management philosophy. I think it captures all of the, I guess, the end-to-end things that need to happen, right? When you're in charge of supporting teachers, managing teachers throughout this really uncertain time, give them the information that they need, involve them in processes, innovations, in solutions, and ultimately inspire them that this is something that they can do. As we wrap up this segment, I just want to pull out one final question from the audience. There will be opportunities later for our audience members, our attendees, to still submit their questions. One question that an audience member sent us, which I invite either Maliha, Shweb, or even Dr. Sofiak to answer. Can you please enlighten us on how you would control academic integrity, I guess learning, right? Ensuring learning of the students or the learners in a distance and blended learning environment. So this person goes beyond, I guess, support for teachers, talking about how teachers can be enabled, capacity built for navigating this uncertain times, and crossing over to students. How does tracking learning outcomes, how does monitoring that look like now, and what are we interested in, and how has that changed from pre-COVID? Maliha, Shweb, Dr. Sofia?
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, Dr. Sofia, for it.
Thank you. Sorry. Well, just a very, very quick one. I'm just a researcher, so I haven't built this in the real practice yet with this. But I think the integrity, the question of integrity is really resonant with one of our study. We in our survey teachers, most of them, it is the challenge for number one for them is about assessment and monitoring. They find it very hard to make sure that students do not cheat. And this is just really a question of an approach for us. For me as a researcher, I would say that this challenge, this is the problem because we just want to transfer what used to be provided at the classroom into online way. We take classroom online. That's what I want to say is that we need to change from the test that we used to have, the marking system that we used to award students by, for example, introducing a project-based lessons or project-based activity where we evaluate students based on what they do, they perform in, they contribute to the project rather than giving mark on, exercise or answering questions on a piece of paper. So I think we need to change how we evaluate the students, then we would have less issue with this. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sofia. Maliha, Shweb, any quick notes before we wrap up this panel?
I do agree that having the opportunity to let students use that knowledge and demonstrate that through many other activities are more important now than just assessing through the assessments. At the same time, what at Teach for Bangladesh we do is also involve parents in that how can the teacher and parent collaboratively together hold the integrity for the learners and actually closely observe. So that's one thing, and we follow our bi-weekly outcomes to see that what is the consistency we see in each of our students' work and performance. So yeah.
Thank you. Shweb, any last words?
Sure, thanks, Mavi. What I would just add to what's been already said, of course, if you deep dive into distance learning pedagogy, there are assessments and standards for assessments that you can use. Of course, we haven't figured it out how to do it at scale in our context. Right now, assessments look relatively very simple. That said, I think one thing we are really focused on is just ensuring that students are connected to learning, connected to teachers, connected to classrooms. I think that for us is like the biggest question at this point. We will figure out the question of assessments in coming days and months, but we also have to keep, understand that we don't have to figure out everything right away, but we do have to keep learners excited about learning, connected to their classrooms, and hopefully intending to return when classrooms open. Thank you, Mavi.
Thank you so much, Shweb. I love what you said about connected to learning. I think amidst all the challenges, if that is one goal that we can meet, then we're already halfway there. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Dr. Sofia, Dr. Robles, Maliha, and Shweb. At this point, I'm closing this first panel for our event today, and I'm turning it over to Angel so that we can hear from the rest of our audience what they think.
Thank you very much, Mavi, and thank you to Dr. Song, Dr. Robles, Webb, and Maliha. You know, our teachers are our heroes. Students admire their teachers, they remember their teachers, they love their teachers. And again, I always hear this, Mavi, the students and parents always say, thank you for all that you do, most especially now, during a time like this when, you know, the parents cross over their roles as parent and become teachers, and the teachers continue to understand this crossover and continue to trust that parents trust them. I like what was said about the trust. You trust the teachers, parents in turn trust their children, that they are confident, they are learning as well from their teachers. And again, talking about roles, the teachers become parents as well. When the parent is not available, the teacher is there.
Yes.
So
I think what's one thing that I really pulled out from that, of course, it was a very robust panel, right? So many things were talked about. I really appreciated the time that our panelists took to share their insights. But one thing that I wanted to pull out from that was really empathy. Empathy across the board is huge. I think we get caught up in assessments, procedural things, getting the school year going, and those are all things that are all important. But empathy for teachers, empathy for parents, what they're going through for students, even for researchers like Dr. Sofia, right, who maybe can't figure out yet how to measure learning outcomes in such an uncertain year. So for me, that was a big insight to take away from the first panel.
Thank you, Mavi, and thank you once again very much to our first panel. Now, to our dear audience, please continue to share your thoughts on the first panel discussion by going to menti.com and kindly type the code you see on your screen, and please provide your answer. And to those who have sent in their answers, thank you very much for your responses. We shall wait for more responses. Briefly, Mavi, I saw one earlier in our question and answer box via Zoom, which they can send in their responses there, as well as the live chat on Facebook about nutrition. You know, how do you keep a healthy mind, body, and spirit when you have extended times on your gadget, or when you're not able to eat on time even? So maybe we can talk about that later on. But first, we have to go to our second panel discussion and leave it a little bit hanging. Okay. All right. So joining us for our second panel discussion, our policy leader from the Philippines, Dr. John Arnold Siena. He's from the Department of Education, National Educators Academy of the Philippines. And prior to his current role at NEAP Central Office, he served in the Department of Education Field Office as Assistant Schools Division Superintendent. Director Siena was a classroom teacher for 14 years before joining the DepEd. Also joining us in our second panel discussion, our school head from Bangladesh, Maliha Ahsan, is the Education Program Manager of the Abinta Kabir Foundation School. And presenting findings of the study is Moni Sip, CEO of Teach for Cambodia, along with Charya Ren, Program Manager and Alumna Fellow from TFC, to provide insight from the lens of a civil sector organization. And to kick off our second panel discussion, let's hear from our students and school heads in this short video.
এই পরিস্থিতিতে যে শিক্ষাটা আমরা পেয়েছি সেটা হচ্ছে যে একজন শিক্ষক হতে হলে যে আগে ক্লাসরুম পারফরমেন্স দিয়ে অথবা তার ছাত্রছাত্রীদের সাথে যোগাযোগ এই কয়েকটা বিষয় এবং তার দক্ষতা ছাত্রছাত্রীকে পড়ালেখায় মনোযোগী করা যে বিষয়গুলো আগে ছিল তার সাথে কিছু যুক্ত হয়েছে সেটা হচ্ছে যে অনলাইনে পাঠদান করার বিষয় এবং টেকনোলজি ব্যবহার করা এবং সামাজিক মাধ্যমগুলোতে কিভাবে অ্যাক্টিভ থাকতে হয় এই বিষয়গুলো একজন শিক্ষকের জন্য এক্সট্রা গুণাবলী হিসেবে
So learning from home is actually quite difficult for me because I've met a lot of issues since school closed. And well, the most problem that I've met is the internet connection.
លោកគ្រូអ្នកគ្រូគាត់ត្រូវតែពង្រឹងនៅសមត្ថភាពក្នុងការបង្រៀននិងការរៀនរបស់សិស្សនឹងហើយនឹងបញ្ហាផ្នែកបច្ចេកទេសដែលអ្វីដែលយើងត្រូវការប្រើនេះបើយើងប្រៀបធៀបទៅបើសិនជាយើងគិតថាបើសិនជាគុំមានជំងឺ Covid ចូលមកនេះផ្នែកប្រើព័ត៌មានវិទ្យាហ្នឹងប្រហែលជា5ឆ្នាំទៅមុខទៀតបានយើងឈានទៅដល់ប៉ុន្តែបច្ចុប្បន្ននេះយើងឈានដល់ហើយឈានដល់ល្អទៀតបញ្ហានេះជាបញ្ហាមួយដែលលំបាកក្នុងការអូសទាញលោកគ្រូអ្នកគ្រូមួយចំនួនដែលគាត់នៅមានផ្នត់គំនិតចាស់គាត់ថាគាត់មិនចេះគាត់មិនចូលរួមគាត់មិនអីទាំងអស់អញ្ចឹងថាគាត់ទៅមិនរួចអញ្ចឹងទៅ
Na-miss ko pong pumunta sa school, ma'am, kasi po mas marami pong interaction tsaka po nakikita ko po yung mga friends ko, classmates, and teachers po, ma'am.
This time of pandemic, I want to see a teachers who are resilient. Resilient in the sense that they can easily adapt to the call of time despite of this situation that face-to-face is not allowed. Teachers who can think out of the box so that they can communicate to their learners despite of these hard situations, despite of limited gadgets of learners, despite of the absence of internet connections, problems in connectivity.
শিক্ষকরা সাহায্য করলে আমরা একটু ভালোভাবে বুঝি। আমার শিক্ষক যেমন হচ্ছে আমরা করোনার সময় আমরা সবাই বাসায়, তাই জন্য আমাদের শিক্ষক আমাদের জুম ক্লাস নিচ্ছে, অ্যাসাইনমেন্ট নিচ্ছে, হোমওয়ার্ক নিচ্ছে ইত্যাদি। এই কাজটা আমার থেকে অনেক ভালো, কারণ করোনার জন্য তো আমরা সবাই বাসায়। আমরা যদি করোনার সময় পড়ালেখা না করি তাহলে আমরা কিছু করতে পারবো না।
Hi, my name is Moni and I am the CEO of Teach for Cambodia. I will be the presenter on the second topic, which is about education through the lens of teachers. We always thinking about teaching and teaching is very difficult. Our educators and teachers find it very challenging because they face a lot of systemic challenges even before the pandemic. And just to pick up from the previous sort of section, that now you have COVID and teachers just face even more challenges and worries and concerns. So in my presentation, I would love to walk you through our finding on the question about what are the qualities that make effective teachers in times of crisis and in times of the non-crisis. Next slide, please. Next one. So before I start, just 3 things that I'm going to talk about today. One is, so who is the teacher before and during COVID-19 pandemic? The second things that we will talk about is teacher perception about teaching itself and learning in the new normal. And the last thing that we will touch on is teacher perception of what makes an effective teacher. Next one. Okay, so why is it so important for us to looking at education from teacher lens, right? So teachers are frontliner. So by understanding how they're looking at education, it really informs us about what the gaps are, and so we can find a much more practical solution that work. So by understanding teacher perception, how they react to the changes that happening as a result of COVID-19 in education will help us uncover skills and mindset that are important during their transformation during this period of time. Next. Okay, so a bit of background about our teacher survey. So we invite teachers from Teach for Bangladesh, all teachers from Teach for Cambodia and Teach for Philippines, and government teachers in our 3 countries that we ran a survey last year. So our study went from July to October 2020. And then the study is in 2 parts. One is we invite them to fill out surveys, and then the second part is in in-depth interview. And our teachers collectively teach both primary school and also secondary school. And that context sort of matter because teaching smaller children and a bit more older children is quite different in terms of indication. And another context I would love to share is that, so when COVID happened, when this study were conducted, Cambodia, we sort of at the middle of school years, but then in the Philippines and Bangladesh, it was sort of happened at the sort of in the beginning of the school year. So that's a bit of context. Next one, please. This one just a bit of breakdown in terms of who our teachers are and that we invite to join. Next one. So we asked our teacher about teaching before pandemic. There's no unique sort of responses from across our 3 countries. So as you can imagine, education, teaching, teachers, kids, it's all very, very relational. So teaching is so all about human relationships and the connection between kids and the teachers. And so before pandemic, what we found, and it's quite obvious, is that teachers find a lot of joy in their teaching because they can focus on their students, they can build relationship a lot better when the student and the kids and the students and the teachers are in the same classroom. They can apply a variety of activities for their students. They just find like teaching very exciting, a lot easier to teach and a lot more fun. And the pandemic sort of took that joy of and that relationship that out of that picture in many ways. And so in the next slide, we're gonna go through in terms of teaching during pandemic. So when we ask our teachers about what does teaching look like during pandemic, this is where we find the response quite differently across the 3 countries. For example, in Bangladesh, they find new different ways of building relationship with their students through one-on-one call, but they also face a lot of losing motivations and also lose track of their sort of purpose and purpose of teaching, purpose of being educators. So it's just like find the challenges in terms of motivation really stood out for us in Bangladesh. Next one. And the second example in the Philippines that stood out to me is that teachers were frontliners. They coordinate with parents. Some of the teachers in the Philippines has to actually go and teach parents how to teach in order to continue learning for kids. Next slide, please. But in my context, in Cambodia, our teacher has to sort of revise a lot of lesson plans. And so when the pandemic hit, we were in the middle of school year. And so we were about to take the semester one exams, and we sort of got shocked in terms of school had to close immediately. And so it was quite challenging to even come up with what is the education intervention and plans. So for us, we grapple with a lot of we grapple with a lot of new questions that we never sort of asked before. We also grapple with sort of questions, but with a different sort of answer. For example, when the pandemic hit, the first thing that we did is that we sort of gathered our teams and also our teachers together, and we try to answer the question about, okay, so what should kids learn, when learning needs to happen, who owns the learning now, and how do we deliver learning, and the how, and all these sort of question, the why, the what, the how has sort of changed as a result of COVID hit on us. And so the key takeaway from this one is that in each of the three countries, the response from teacher during pandemic differ based on the local context, and also how government and school respond to it, and also the timing of when the pandemic sort of happened. Next slide, please. And so next slide, we sort of ask the teacher a bit more in depth about what is their perception about education in quote unquote the big new words, new normal, and what is their outlook, how are they thinking about their confidence in their teaching, but all in all of us was just saying that they're still grappling with that challenging landscape. Next slide, please. So we asked teacher about three things again. One is teacher confidence in teaching new modality, which is online and distant learning. Number two is the student, like what is their confidence and perception about student ability to learn. And number three is that what are they thinking about the parents' ability to support their students. Interestingly, we got a very sort of high, higher response from the Philippines, but a lower confidence and perception in Cambodia and Bangladesh. Next slide. And again, Cambodia seemed to be lower in terms of teacher perception of their own effectiveness on average. But on average, teachers are neutral and or moderately agrees that they have skill necessary to be effective in the current pandemic. I think again, I want to go back to when the pandemic happened and when this study happened, right? So in Cambodia, when the pandemic hit in the middle of the school year, we are not prepared for this. In terms of training, in terms of rethinking about what are we doing, so we need to take a lot of pause and step back. But the sort of like the school already started. We're in the middle of this, and now we have like, okay, pause. Everyone to pause and stop. And there's a new policies like, okay, you need to figure something out with yourself. There will need to be like, okay, move into e-learning immediately right now. And so it was quite challenging. And in the Philippines, I think in the Philippines has more time for teacher trainings and preparing. So because of the new academic year sort of postpone or delay in certain ways, so that I think that they have more time for training. And what does this tell me and tell all of us is that training matter. Being more prepared to handle the teaching during this new normal, it helps. Next one, please. Okay, so what we find collectively across these three countries is that when teachers feel very confident in parents, students, and their own ability to be successful in distant learning, the more effective they perceive themselves as teachers. Next slide. And so through how they see their teaching is that so across the three countries, what we share a bit more unique here is that teachers are addressing change in their profession by developing a lot of targeted skills. And so the targeted skills that they develop is often reported associated with technology and the new modality skills. And so another thing that we sort of found out is that teacher often refers to mindset when they sort of handling this sort of discord with themselves. And so by thinking about this, one thing that I really sort of also learned is that some of our teachers using self-reflection tools to think about how to stay optimistic, how to actually find like empathy with the students. Some teachers also doing a bit more collaboration work. They also come together to sort of do reflection as a group and in circle to figuring out how to move forward together. And so to think about that sort of mindset of soft skills really stood out to us here in Cambodia and also across the three countries. However, regardless of the approach that they do in terms of developing themselves during the pandemic, the narrative seemed to be the same. One is that the first few months was very, very tough. And the first few months, they need to actually involve a lot of change management strategy, such as being flexible, creativities, those kind of real skills that they need to actually involve in during that sort of first 3 months of when the pandemic hit. And what really drive all the teacher moving forward and keep going and develop themselves during the pandemic is that they have this sincere concern and empathy toward their student. So for my contact in Cambodia, we sort of when COVID hit and we are thinking about what is the most important thing, we're very clear that keeping kids safe and learning matter. So a lot of our teachers stop asking, okay, what are the test score, what are the results, what are the things like that. They're more concerned about, okay, how are my kids are doing? Where are they now? How can I reach out to them? Are they going, are they safe mentally? So there's a lot of conversation and their genuine concern that really try their work during that period of time. Next slide. And so where we sort of take away big picture from our research is that the soft skills emerge as so important for our teachers to manage these sort of uncontrollable but also very uncertain challenges. And we found that mindset emerged as very useful for training and developing our teachers during pandemic compared to hard skills. But what we don't mean that hard skill is not important, but a lot of preparation and training that actually develop some hard skills are no longer relevant as we move into distant learning, especially in Cambodia. So a combination of both, I would say, is that really help inform us a lot in terms of developing and supporting our teachers here. And so these soft skills, including optimism, collaboration, patience, resilience, empathy, and a growth mindset, are very, very important, especially for developing and supporting our teacher during the time of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moni. So we are now on to our next panel, building off that earlier presentation where we saw personal concerns of teachers, where teachers are at when, after the pandemic hit, and where parents are at and students are at. We saw that personal concerns that they had often cannot be separated from their work. And so let's hear from our panelists today how they've seen teacher qualities presented in our last findings, which Moni very effectively presented and shared, play out in their line of work. Joining us from the Philippines is Director John Siena, the head of the National Educators Academy of the Philippines, which is a teacher training arm of the Department of Education. Director Sienna, it was interesting how targeted skills, mindsets were really highlighted in the results of the knowledge product. Moni also began by sharing how important confidence and perception among teachers mattered in terms of trying to see how effective they could be as teachers. Is this something that you also see in your line of work, or is this something that you come across very often in your work in NAIA?
Yeah, thank you, Mavi, for the question. And also thank you, Muni, for the presentation. It was very insightful. A lot of those things that you mentioned are actually reflective of what is happening in the Philippines. And I can resonate with a lot of the questions that we also raised as a product of that research. For example, you mentioned about building relationship. And in fact, that is one skill that I'm seeing to be a very important component of the implementation of the distance learning, because without that relationship built between the teachers and the school and the parents and the learners themselves, it's quite difficult to translate technical skills, technical knowledge into more effective practices. And I think the teachers are actually trying have started to realize that, because when the pandemic struck in early of 2020, we were practically caught flat-footed. I mean, the classes were about to end at that point, and then all of a sudden it had to be, the graduation had to be postponed, and then we had to also think about reopening of classes as soon as, and then we decided that it had to open, schools will have to open in October. But before that, before in fact classes reopened via distance learning, we had to do a lot of preparatory work. One part of that preparation was the training of the teachers, based on the basic education learning continuity plan that the Department of Education prepared, and which was mentioned by Dr. Robles earlier. And so yeah, we started with, as part of the preparation nationwide, we developed modules to target the pretty specific skills in the implementation of the learning delivery modalities. And as you know, in the Philippines, the most dominant delivery modality was the modular distance learning. And so meaning most of our training programs really focused on how to prepare our teachers for the implementation of the learning delivery modality using the modules. And so those are very specific, very specific topics on the adjustments in the curriculum that was made, so meaning the content that they had to teach, and then in fact even how to prepare lesson guides or the lesson plans, the different strategies in very broad strokes. So because this is nationwide, we also had training for the principals on how to actually identify in a more rational way the learning delivery modality that should be implemented in the school. But apparently it was the modular distance learning that really prevailed, because I think in the initial implementation it was indicated that 95%, 85 to 95% of all the schools, of all the 46,000 schools in the country, adopted the modular distance learning. But of course, implementation of the LD, preparation and all the documents and all the technical administrative preparations were done. How to deliver the modules, how to collect the modules, how to mark the modules, and how to connect to the students, and so on. All these administrative arrangements were actually laid out in the beginning. But of course, we know that the effectiveness of delivering quality education is beyond training, is beyond just introducing the technology if you have one, is beyond telling the teachers that you have to talk to the parents and so on. And what we found out towards the end of the cycle of the education cycle in the Philippines is that I am living with a teacher. My nephew is a teacher, is teaching in one of our schools here in Metro Manila, in Marikina in particular. And I always observe how he actually does the distribution and the collection and all this. So maybe the administrative arrangements are okay, but he is grappling actually with how do you deal with students who cannot even submit their modules, the accomplished modules. Or if they submit their modules, they are virtually blank. Nothing is there. You cannot even rate the students. And then there's a question earlier of what is the integrity of the modules that have been accomplished by the learners? Did they actually accomplish those modules? And what is the learning outcome that really came out of this exercise of giving the modules, and hoping against hope that they're actually doing this and learning at the same time? Of course, we can only trust that the process and the teachers, and the learners and their parents are responsible enough. And now we are grappling with assessing the children's performance. And in fact, just 2 days ago, we had a forum on how do you do remote assessment, remote learning assessment. And it was one of the big questions. How do you ensure that when you look at the students' output, you actually are looking at their actual sort of performance? So how can you put a very close approximation of the students' learning in the modules that they have actually accomplished? And so and we can only trust that the parents and the learners themselves and the teachers understand the whole setup, because now, as mentioned in the previous segment, now the shift in the roles have more or less transferred to more of the parents now. I mean, the learners and the parents, who owns, and the question of money on who now owns the learning, because the teachers are actually the role of the teacher or the level of control of the teacher and of the school in general in terms of learning has actually diminished because of this pandemic, because of the distance modality, because of the the proximity, right? And your access to what is really happening in the school, so you don't know. And I guess this is where my point on building that relationship with the learners and the teachers, because it's important, and the empathy, the overarching theme of empathy becomes very important as well. So it's one thing to train the teachers on the technical aspect, on the administrative aspect, distribution, etc., and so on, giving them the modules and so on, right? But it's another thing for the teachers to have the soft skills, as mentioned. How do they build that relationship? What are the skills that that can build the relationship with the learner, so that, and the parents, in fact, and the caregivers, and even with the fellow teachers? How do you build the relationship so that you can trust each other, that you are actually doing your role? So, and I think it is also the teacher that sort of builds that sort of that culture, and then that kind of relationship. So that to me, that is a very important component of the effectiveness of the teachers. The other thing is that based on our initial study on the implementation of the learning delivery modalities, we found that teachers find it very, very relevant that they continue to talk with their fellow teachers in their professional learning network through the Learning Action Cell in the Philippines, when they begin to share their concerns and their problems and the challenges, and then they begin to reflect on what is been happening, and they begin to get feedback as well, and to the coming back and forth of the feedback, of the comments and suggestions coming from each other. They actually it becomes the situation becomes a little bit facilitated in terms of how do you now approach the situation because of the challenges. So I think collaboration, as pointed out, is very critical here. The ability to share with others, or at the same time being open to different possibilities. And related to that, because we're talking of what can maybe constitute effective teaching and effective teacher in this time of pandemic, is your agility to learn, relearn, and unlearn, which is really very popular, Alvin Toffler. But this is really very prominent now. I mean, you cannot just rely on what you have learned in the past, in the old normal, as we always say. But even in the future, even when we reopen schools eventually, I think this attitude of agility, this attitude of growth mindset, and taking on that decision, and I think one of the important preconditions here for effectiveness as well is the teacher being able to make quick decisions, right? Because the situation is very fluid. We don't have a full handle of everything. Anything can happen anytime. So in some cases, schools open, schools close, you know, and then all of a sudden you don't have the module. So what will you do, right? You don't have the internet. All of a sudden your internet just got conked out. So what will you do, and so on. So you have to be very quick on the draw in terms of decision making, and this kind of attitude of taking on that responsibility, right? To be sure to be able to deliver education, and this is really coming from also from that you know, from that dedication, from that commitment of the teacher identity, that, you know, no matter what happens, I need to deliver. I need to bring education to the learners, because this is not, the pandemic is not an excuse for not giving quality education. So I guess that's my contribution for this
Thank
discussion.
you so much, Director Sienna. I think all of us appreciated that very grounded picture, right, of what's happening on the ground, your attempt at connecting Moni's presentation, findings from the data with what you're actually seeing in your experience in the NAIAP. I think what I want to pull out there is this note about how in many ways we are being called to innovate. In many ways we're being called to be creative, but in equally many ways, you also have to go back to the basics. More than ever now, it's back to the basics. It's about building human connection, rebuilding relationships with your students, listening to them, right? Collaborating, building communities of practice with co-teachers. And I think that's super, super interesting. I'd like to hear from our school head from Bangladesh, Maliha Asan, the education program manager of the Abinta Kabir Foundation School. Is this something that you're seeing in your context as well, or is there anything in the findings that also stood out for you?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Moni, for this wonderful in-depth presentation. So I work in a school which is for all girls, and they're all coming from, you know, underserved communities. And so, you know, I just want to share a little bit about our experience handling the pandemic. So our schools have been closed in Bangladesh since March 18, 2020, last year, and it hasn't opened ever since. So it's been a very, very long time that students are completely out of reach. And so I remember in the first month, we were so ready to handle anything. We were motivated. We were like, we can do it. But as the days passed on, the weeks passed on, the question was, when is this going to end? When are we returning to the classrooms? Teachers were losing their motivation. Students were losing interest. And parents were, you know, they just didn't want to help out anymore. So it feels like every day, it's like we are discussing what to do. We are discussing new ways of handling the situation. And even after a year, we think we know what to do, but still, you know, the situation is changing every day. So these are the things that we are going through, and we are still not experts at that. And so from the presentation, one thing that really stood out for me was the findings that Moni presented about the confidence level of teachers, the students' ability to learn, and the parents' readiness to support. These three factors are so interrelated, and we face that every day. It's almost like a Venn diagram, how to use groups to enhance the other groups. So now, you know, as a head teacher, my question always is, how do we utilize one group? You know, how do we enhance teachers' confidence to reach better ability of students to learn? And also, what tools do we give the parents so that they are more ready to support in the home, so that teachers can be more confident? So these three factors are very interrelated, and this is one thing that I will be, you know, leaving this presentation with. And another thing that I want to talk about is, you know, the soft skills that your findings presented. So as a head teacher, I always would focus on, you know, training my teachers on classroom management and all probably the, you know, the hard skills. But now definitely, as you said, we have to shift that mindset and equally give focus to the soft skills. And we have been doing that. And so one question is always that, how do we measure the soft skills? It's not that easy, right? You can't really give a score to a teacher on how much empathy she is portraying. So that's one question that, I have for myself and probably for other head teachers. But definitely one thing that I would want also is for the teachers to kind of transfer these soft skills to the students, kind of embed them in the lesson plans, in the curriculum, so that students who are the future leaders of the world, they can also be very, have empathy, have trust, and all those soft skills that we discussed. And so, going forward, I think these times are very uncertain and unprecedented. And, forums like these are so important to kind of share ideas among educators. So I would love to hear from the rest of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Malia. I think I can completely empathize with the ever-changing situation. Just when you think you've gotten a handle of a challenge, something changes, a curveball is thrown your way, and you have to figure it out as you go along. And what we're left with is really just making bets, hopefully studied, intelligent bets, but bets nonetheless, right? And I guess the only way to look at how, whether a bet is effective or not, or works well or not, is to measure. But then even measurement, as you said, like if soft skills is important, if empathy and confidence is important, how do you exactly measure that? And so that's something that also really hits the mark for me. I'd like to hear from Sharia Ren, Program Manager and Alumna Fellow from Teach for Cambodia. So as a former teacher yourself and as someone managing teachers now and programs now, is there anything from the conversation so far that has jumped out at you and that you'd like to speak to?
Thank you so much, Maui. But I totally relate to the finding of the presentation regarding the importance of mindset and soft skills, and also want to echo the previous panelists as well, raising about the importance of mindset and soft skill, empathy, and other soft skills that they find helpful for teacher for teaching effectiveness. And for me, last year, I was also teaching my students. And even though I have the teaching foundation, I have the teaching experience in the classroom, I can navigate technology, but still I was stuck when the school closed in the middle of the school year. So it showed me that some of the hard skills that we trained teacher in the past were not relevant. It did not prepare teacher enough for the pandemic as well as the distance learning and teaching. So from the program side, this year, we shifted our approach. We shifted the approach with our third cohort, starting school in 2021. We still provide them with the important teaching foundation we believe essential for teachers to navigate, but we emphasize more on the soft skill and the mindset to help them thrive during challenging time. So for example, early this year, school closed again. And at the time the school closed, 70% of our teachers had the student in their platform already. So they were able to roll out the distance learning and teaching immediately. And what we can learn from this is that with the same teaching foundation, but with the right soft skill and mindset, it makes a big difference and big influence on teacher and how they show up differently during time of crisis. However, even though they have the student in their platform, but at that time, the question around whether or not they can engage with the student in a meaningful way, and to also echo to Director Sina mentioned about the relationship as the foundation of learning, and also the findings showing that the teacher in the previous time, they had a lot of joy in the classroom. So how can we bring those joys back? So at that time, our teacher was in school for only 1 month with limited relationship with the student, with little context about school and community. So there was some tension, some assumption and doubt regarding why that student didn't show up in a distance learning platform. So the question around why my student didn't show up, why the parent didn't push their children to show up, hearing across our teachers' community. So we recognize that there's a gap there, and we realize we need to reinforce a certain mindset, which is the empathy and compassion, so that we hope for teacher to actually operate from more empathy toward the community. So we bring in the data about the the parent perception, their view on the teaching learning when school closed, their view on the role of teacher when school closed, and also the role of themselves, and to the data around their current struggle and situation that they were facing. And we bring those data to show our teacher, to help them see the situation from a different lens, from the parent lens. And that data help our teacher to shift in terms of their attitude when dealing with their student. They get to reflect on their assumption, and they get to be more curious to get to know how their students are doing daily, where they are right now, what they are facing. And a story from one of our teachers as well, like she was really struggling with getting her student to the platform. And she was wondering, like, why my student didn't show up, what's wrong with me? So after that data, she realized there's something that she should know about her student. So she called her student, and then the response was really touching. Her student said she wanted to learn, but because of the pandemic, she needs to go out and help her family work so that she can contribute to the financial struggling in her family. And from the student side, they request to join the learning at night and submit the homework late, something like that. And that helped our teacher to really understand the situation from another side. So they operate from more empathy, more compassion. They were able to customize their teaching. So far, just a month after the school closed, we can connect to 20% of our students compared to the national average of only 35%. And we provide both synchronous and asynchronous, or both synchronous and asynchronous based on different context and the student need. And also to ego, Director Sina, teacher now need to use a lot of feedback, a lot of reflection, a lot of like they need to hear more from their students so that to make sure that their teaching and their support is of the student need. And how that teach us is that the mindset and skill was not something that we can build with only 1 or 2 training, but it is something that has to be ongoing. It has to be a lot of reinforcement, a lot of adjustment, so that a teacher can get a sense of those adjustment and agility, either to adjust their implementation or deliver that to the student as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharia. Totally agree with your last point about how building mindsets and all of these soft skills are not, it's not the kind of thing that you can build with one training module or training session. It is more of an ongoing thing, and the type of thing that we should provide ongoing support for. We are trying to manage our time for this second panel, but I'd like to end by asking one question that I hope all 4 of you at least answer very quickly, if you can. We talked about the importance of building mindsets. We talked about the importance of empathy, compassion, confidence. Has there anything, is there anything in your, I guess, programming, right, in the line of work that you've been doing that you found has worked tremendously for you, or is promising as a program or an intervention of sorts to support teachers to develop these further? Let's start with Director Sienna.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, in the implementation of the learning delivery modalities courses, we have three sets of themes. Now, one of those is in building relationship. One of these is promoting learner wellness and parent involvement. And another theme in our training is on the self-care, personal well-being, where we also infuse some of the elements of course, you cannot teach empathy, but we know that when you are being kind to yourself, you're taking care of yourself, then you are also able to sort of radiate those skills, hopefully in when they deal with the parents and the learners. Meaning we are not training the teachers directly on those soft skills, but they are sort of embedded in the design. For example, in the training on how do you promote learner wellness. So you have to build that kind of relationship and that kind of trust between the school system as well as the home, so that you will be able to also communicate the intention of this learning delivery modality within the pandemic situation. And then that personal wellness, I think, will be a very, very important component of, of the professional development of teachers, to couple the technical and the administrative aspect of that. So I think that has been provided to all of the teachers online. But the only setback that we are actually getting, of course, is that because it's on demand, so we don't know who among the teachers are actually accessing the training. So because we cannot force it, we only offer it to them as a matter of a personal choice if they need. So yeah, so I think that's one thing that
Thank you.
we can take a look at that again. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sienna. I'll make sure to check out those resources and see if we can pick up a few ideas. Maliha, anything on your end that seems to be promising or shows encouraging results as you support your teachers?
So what I did first was, our school is very small, first of all. So we have 8 teachers, and I kind of assessed how each of them get motivated, kind of assess them from how they are, how they like to work. And one of my teachers, luckily, she's a very good listener. She can identify, what are the challenges of other teachers. She's like the shoulder to cry on. So I gave her an upgradation for her role, and I made her into the school welfare counselor. So now she and I work and, kind of identify what are the challenges for the teachers, what are the challenges for the students and the parents. Her role is to always find out how everyone is feeling, if they're all right, the mental well-being she's always seeing. And she also did an online training on counseling. So that's been going really well. She is like the ambassador for the school for mental health. And I think that's one thing that I can also suggest to other head teachers, kind of see how your teachers work and identify people who can help with the overall well-being of the school. Thank you.
Thank you, Malia. That's such a great idea. We actually have something similar in Teach for the Philippines. We call her a human development manager. Her primary role is basically to support the psychosocial well-being of fellows, sometimes be a listening ear, right? Because we all know that conditions on the ground can be very, very chaotic and difficult to manage. Sharia, Moni, anything from Teach for Cambodia that we can learn from?
For us, I think our mindset always like education is such a long game. And the most important thing is that how do we stay in that long game and not get distracted by a lot of all the crises and a lot of things that are happening outside. Imagine that a child like from first grade to 12th grade to university is so long, right? To educate one child, and it takes a lot to really stay in that long game piece, right? And so for us, we don't want to reinvent all kinds of new wheels. So we will apply something that worked over the past 18 months, for example, building community practice, foundational training, coaching mindset to be continued. But it's so interesting in terms of Dr. Sina and the other band, all of us now talking about mental health and wellness. And this is something that Jaya and I and also like Teach Home, they are thinking about not making mental health and wellness as sort of a new project, but how do we actually turn it into the DNA of our organization, and also thinking about, okay, how do we train, we start day one talking about that topic, and so that, I mean, the whole purpose is that how can we still stay teaching and our students, but also like as sustainable teachers and leaders, we want to focus on that. This is something new for us too, walking into the new school year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Moni. Thank you to our panelists. I guess my parting hope as we close the second panel is that all this work that we were doing and we're leaning into when it comes to empathy, building confidence, building growth mindset is something that also finds its way to our students, right? And so we build an entirely new generation of young people who have this embedded in their psyche. This is something that they know they're aware of and something that they can actively pursue and develop with other people as well. At this point, I will be turning it over to Angel so that we can hear from the rest of our audience and move on to the next part of our program.
Thank you very much, Mavi, and to our presenter, Muni, and to the rest of our panelists, Director Sienna, Ms. Asan, and Charia from Teach from Cambodia. Mavi, resilience, mental awareness, and mental health. Very important during a time like this. and the support that the teachers give each other, the shoulder to cry on. Wow, that goes straight to the heart, because sometimes we think our teachers, they have it together. But of course, with all the challenges they face, they're strong, but they also feel that, they need the parents, they need the students, they need the teachers and other members of society, just to keep them up and to give them the drive to keep on going and to enjoy what they do despite the challenges they face in the learning segment and in being an educator.
I mean, for sure, Angel. I think if anything, what this pandemic and this whole crazy, year and a half has taught us in education, but also in life, is that community matters. The sense of community really matters, and forging connections is more important than ever. And so, honestly, that's what I got from the second panel and from this whole afternoon in general.
Thank you, Mavi. And we continue this afternoon with the next panel. It's time for us to explore how effective mindset can further develop in our teachers through training and support from institutions as well as education organizations. Joining our third panel are our policy leader from Bangladesh, KM Enamul Haq, is the Deputy Director of Campaign for Popular Education, CAMPE, a network of NGOs, academics, researchers, and campaigners working in the field of education. He has more than 23 years of experience in the education sector. He has a good understanding of education policies and plans, as well as education financing issues in Bangladesh. Our school head from Cambodia, Ling Hor Ching, is the Vice School Director at Sompov Poon High School in Kendal Province. He has worked in education for over 13 years. He has been at the front and center of implementing the Secondary Education Improvement Project funded by the World Bank, and has led his school to outstandingly achieve the School Improvement Standard in 2018. He was recently promoted as a young professional school director by the Ministry of Education, Youth, and Sport. Presenting findings of the study is Adelaide Elpidama, Chief Program Officer and Alumna Fellow from the inaugural cohort of Teach for the Philippines, as well as Gabi Montinola, TFP's Data and Impact Manager, to provide insight from the lens of an education resource organization in the Philippines. And to start off our third panel, let's hear it once again for our teachers and students in this short video.
Talking about the school, it's like mainly the school management team or the school director being open and also understanding that teachers, including me, during this time is facing uncertainty and difficulty in adapting to the new normal.
We teachers also need to remain mentally healthy before we actually teach our students about mental support. And I also feel that acknowledgement is quite necessary, because the teachers are doing one of the most challenging works in this pandemic period.
So far, natutunan ko talaga yung importansya ng collaborating and empowering parents. Kasi itong new normal setup gave me the opportunity to emphasize the value of positive relationships at home.
আমার পড়ালেখাটা আরো ভালো করার জন্য আমার শিক্ষক আর আমার যথেষ্ট পরিমাণ ফ্রি থাকা দরকার। যদি আমার টিচারের যদি বেশি ফ্রি সময় থাকতো, তাহলে আমি আমার টিচারকে ফোন করে বলতাম, আমার যদি কোনো কোশ্চেন থাকতো তাহলে আমার টিচারকে ফোন করলে টিচার আমাকে ভালোভাবে বুঝিয়ে দিত।
My organization Teach for Bangladesh has supported me with training and facilities. They have guided me in how to shift classrooms to virtual media. So we have done several sessions and trainings on distance learning, digital literacy, and developing virtual lesson contents and so on. These learnings have helped me to get adapted to the new normal.
Teach for Cambodia, I appreciate that the organizations like working so hard to ensure our financial safety and also our mental well-being. So I'm glad that we had the time, the space during the convening, that we can reconnect, share, reflect, and stay grounded together and inspire each other to move forward.
In the next year, I hope that we all will be going back to school and not studying in virtual class anymore because it's so hard.
Para sa akin, malaking tulong yung coaching sessions na natatanggap namin mula sa ICM namin hanggang ngayon. Kasama yung mga trainings na nakuha namin mula sa Summer Institute 2019-2020 at yung iba pang mga trainings na nakuha namin sa TFP. Dahil nai-apply talaga namin ito simula sa kung paano makitungo sa mga katrabaho namin hanggang sa mga technical na trabaho namin bilang mga teachers.
Keep safe po, ma'am, and be strong, and sana po take care of yourself and take time to rest too.
Once again, we would like to thank Aditya Barua, Fidor Sererot, Dwayne Garcia, Shadman Absar Chaduri, Hai Charia, Leia Lingatong, Sar Nacionales, and Kaloy Kaldit, our teachers and students from Bangladesh, Cambodia, and the Philippines. I am Adelaide Elpidama, and as a former teacher, I'm honored to share with you recommendations from the study on teacher training, development, and support. As we've heard about the challenges our school communities face this pandemic year and the important role of our teachers, our hope is that the findings and recommendations from this study spark the conversations and actions towards supporting and preparing our teachers. Next slide, please. We begin by recognizing that updating policies, designing relevant procedures, and cascading plans ensure required time and resources. The recommendations we will be exploring today can be implemented with little to no strain on our education departments or ministries' already limited resources. These recommendations are anchored on 5 principles derived from the analysis of the study. As an overview, these are the questions that we will be exploring in the next 10 minutes. Next slide, please. We can go to the next slide. Next slide. I think we can go to the slides on recommendations for teacher training. There you go. As I've said, we will cover 5 principles found from the analysis of the study. If we go to the next slide, we start with a call for continued efforts in addressing student learning needs. Next slide. As we say in Teach for the Philippines, everything we do is para sa bata. Translated in English, this means for the child. Similarly, across Bangladesh, Cambodia, and the Philippines, the student is and will always be at the center of the work of a teacher. The study shows that when teachers feel that the students' needs are addressed, they also feel more confident in the level of service they provide. As we've seen in the first presentation, majority of the households surveyed face multiple barriers to education access. The photo that you see now is one of our student participants in Teach for the Philippines functional literacy program. To ensure access to the programs, Teach for the Philippines provides households with learning kits and communication allowances throughout the duration of the program. Parent training and support, as we've talked about in earlier presentations and panel discussions, are also integral components of Teach for the Philippines programs. Parents and guardians play the important role of a learning facilitator at home. Additionally, as we've heard Director Shena speak about this earlier, the Philippines Department of Education also recognized that not all students have access to technology and internet. So the agency provided learning modules as alternative means of delivering instruction to students at home. As Director Robles shared in the Dr. Robles rather shared in the first panel, school communities, division offices, and local leaders are in the best position to work together in addressing learning barriers based on their community's unique context. In doing so, we're not only addressing students' learning needs, but we are also building the confidence of our teachers in their ability to ensure learning continuity in a pandemic year. Next slide, please. The second principle highlights the importance of training teachers for targeted skills. Next slide. The study shows that training inputs promote teachers' effectiveness at the time of crisis. However, as Director Shena pointed out earlier, targeted training, either based on the needs of the community or the teacher's confidence in their skills, has yielded more results. There is an opportunity to create training plans that are relevant to the needs of the intended audience and to make training accessible to those who would benefit most from additional support. For example, in the context of Teach for the Philippines, teacher fellows and teacher leaders joined quarterly learning calls based on the results of training needs surveys that we rolled out to our teachers. This allowed our trainers to respond to the emerging needs of the teachers as they go through a pandemic year. Where training can only be delivered to a few teachers, there's an opportunity to incorporate knowledge on cascading or transferring learning to make sure that other teachers can receive the same training inputs. For example, in Teach for the Philippines context, teachers have been equipped with the knowledge and skills to echo their training to their school communities. Next slide, please. We now move to enhancing teacher support through non-training means. We've been talking about social connection and other forms of support for our teachers. In the next slide, the study also showed that teachers across 3 countries found support through social connections and individualized coaching. Our teachers found emotional, psychological, and professional support from their co-teachers and coaches from Teach4 organizations. Remote teaching, as we've established earlier, has taken away our typical avenues for building relationships with each other. Typically, that's through lunch breaks, school assemblies, or after-school conversations. And now our teachers are looking for alternative ways of connecting with their school communities. The study suggests that teachers felt supported when they're able to speak with people who are going through the same challenges. As Director Shena highlighted earlier, there is an opportunity for schools or division offices to formalize spaces like learning circles or learning action cells where teachers can talk about their shared experiences, exchange best practices, and perhaps brainstorm solutions to challenges in their school communities. Finally, the study also showed that individualized coaching for teachers in Teach4 organizations provided contextualized emotional, psychological, and professional support. So these organizations' coaching frameworks have helped new teachers adjust to disorienting experiences. The Teach4 coaches are also able to provide contextualized support based on the teacher's unique background and experiences. They are able to help teachers develop change management skills, growth mindset, and resilience. As we've shared earlier, these have been found helpful in dealing with challenges during crisis. Fortunately, there is an opportunity for education ministries and departments to support programs like Teach for the Philippines Fellowship and Teacher Leader Program that's been providing access to training and coaching to public school teachers. In the next slide, we move on to our 4th recommendation. This is anchored on recognizing adaptation to the new normal as effective work. Next slide. As we've heard from the experiences on the ground, there's an opportunity to acknowledge the shifts and transformations that our teachers are experiencing right now. While it was evident in the study that the purpose and focus of education efforts are the students, there's an equally important need to support teachers as they adapt to the new normal. The study has shown, as you see in the picture, that teachers have struggled with transformation from classroom instruction to distance learning. For example, in the context of Teach for the Philippines, you see that teachers have been trained how to learn, how to design rather modules, distribute and retrieve them from households regularly in areas where TV and radio-based instructions are accessible. Teachers have become anchors, producing TV and radio lessons for their students. Teachers have also provided an added layer of social support for students and their families, sometimes being available on call or via messaging apps to address learning-related concerns of parents and guardians at any given point in the day. If we only focus on learning outcomes, this communicates to our teachers that their effectiveness only begins when a student starts to learn. But in reality, as we've heard earlier in the previous panels and presentations, our teachers exert significant time and resources on auxiliary crisis response efforts before learning can actually start. In recognizing these efforts, our teachers will feel more encouraged, confident, and effective in the work that they do. Lastly, and definitely not the least, if we go to the next slide, we see that there is an opportunity to invest in mindset development during non-crisis time. Next slide. The study shows that Teach4 fellows cited mindset development that they received as useful during times of crisis. And these trainings go as far back as 2 years prior to the onset of the pandemic. It shows that training of mindsets can be done preemptively. While it's hard for us to predict the specific skills that our schools will require during crisis, the study has shown that mindsets such as learning agility, adaptability, and growth mindset are useful in both non-crisis and crisis times. And developing these mindsets lead to a more resilient group of teachers. As we heard from the second panel, mindset development does not only come from training, but also through carefully facilitated coaching conversations and teacher support groups. In the context of the Philippines, an example of this is the Department of Education's Learning Action Cells. Next slide. As I close this presentation and turn this over back to Mavi, I'd like to ground us back to this essential key point. Now more than ever, teachers continue to be critical to nation building because of their dedication and capacity to directly contribute to the improvement of their work, as well as the education system that they're part of. As I have said at the start of this presentation, it is our hope that the findings and recommendations we shared spark conversations and actions for stakeholders in education. At this point, I turn us back to Mavi for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Addie. Coming off the second presentation, we saw how mindsets and soft skills are essential qualities for teachers to have in a crisis situation. But developing these do not happen overnight, and it requires concerted effort from our country's national education agencies, teacher training institutions, and even the civil sector to provide adequate and appropriate training opportunities and support to develop these skills and mindsets among our teachers. I'd like to hear from our panelists this afternoon on what significant ideas or practices in their partner countries have been effective thus far as an extension of our last discussion from the second panel. Joining us from Bangladesh is KM Enamul Hok, Deputy Director of Campaign for Popular Education, or CAMPE, in Bangladesh. We'd like to hear your thoughts around this, Director Hok.
It was nice listening to the presentation, and I would like to start from the last word about the mindset. I think growth mindset is the critical aspect of overcoming this kind of challenges. We know due to pandemic, there was lockdown across the globe, but lockdown limited our mobility, but didn't lock down our learning. People learn through different ways, and they adopt different modalities. And teachers and students face a lot of challenges during this pandemic because of the school closure. When we are talking about the teacher support, I think we need to look back to the Maslow's theory of the hierarchy of needs. So basic need is the critical, then psychological needs, and self-fulfillment needs. If you look at the support extended by Teach for Bangladesh, Teach for Cambodia, and Teach for Philippines, in all those cases, they have emphasized on self-fulfillment needs. And there was lots of discussion about how they embrace challenges, how they continue their effort to overcome the obstacles, how they celebrate their achievements, and how they welcome the feedback and critics from the community, from the parents, from the peer teachers, and finally, how they learn from others. And I believe today's session is another round of opportunity to learn from others. So I enjoyed that part most. So to go to the specific areas, I would like to emphasize, first of all, I would like to support all 5 principles presented. So those 5 principles are very critical. I would like to start with some of the issues related to basic needs of the teacher. So as teacher, they need 2 important things. One is knowledge, another one is working condition. In terms of working condition, there are differences among the schools. Most of the government schools, they have well-resourced, but non-government low-fee schools are not well-resourced. Some of them have been quite well-resourced. Some of them are really facing challenge during this pandemic. So keeping this in mind, we find that Teach for Bangladesh has provided support to a number of schools and school teachers through their fellows, which help to overcome some of those challenges. But I would like to pose the question to the national mechanism, the government. What is the situation of other schools, mainstream schools? Because we are talking about around 18 million learners at the primary level, not only few schools. So these schools give us some kind of confidence that it is possible. So I would like to emphasize on that. This is possible if there is a support base. Teacher can do something. They can face the challenge. We need some kind of education and emergency framework, which will ensure that how teachers will be supported, both through pedagogical aspect, linking the curriculum, teaching learning process, and assessment. As the schools were closed, it was not very easy to cover the entire syllabus by the teacher. So they had to prioritize some issues. So where to prioritize, how to ensure minimum learning. So in some of our discussion, we are talking about we don't need to think about all the subject during this pandemic. We need to focus on the basic issues. For example, literacy and numeracy. That is the basic skills we need to focus on. So that will release the stress of the teacher. So this is one area I would like to emphasize. I would like to emphasize that government need to think very critically, particularly with regard to the children's psychological aspect. Children are at home for long. They need contact with teacher. They need contact with their fellow students. But the pandemic doesn't allow us. So what could be the alternative? How this challenge is analyzed by the psychosocial expert, and how those are being transformed into action. So this is a critical question. With regard to support to the teacher, we are amazed that most of the teachers in Bangladesh, they actually voluntarily engaged in teaching learning process. Because of the pandemic, There was a restriction on mobility. There was 4 modalities introduced by government. One is television based, one is radio based, one is internet based, and another one is mobile phone based. So none of the modalities actually reach all the people. So there are issue of marginalization. So if you think about leaving no one behind, and if you think about inclusive education, what would be the core component of reaching the most marginalized? Are we ready to reach the most marginalized? So that is one of the critical issue. And teacher needs support. So there were modest support to the mainstream schools, but most of the mainstream schools education are kind of delivering lecture, not interactive. So Teach for Bangladesh has demonstrated how we can introduce interactive teaching learning process during this pandemic. I think I should stop here now. I'll tell more when I get second round of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Hoke. I liked what you said about the importance of addressing basic needs first, maybe streamlining our focus, directing our efforts towards the most essential skills, the most essential support that not just teachers, but students need. I think that is also something that came out of the study, right? Apart from building communities of practice, networks of support for our teachers, also recognizing the amount of work that comes with ensuring learning continuity at this time. And in recognition of that, maybe there is an opportunity to further hone in on what is very fundamental and what allows us to meet our most basic goals moving forward. I'd like to hear from this point for how it went for the teachers in Cambodia from Vice School Director Ling Hur Ching. Sir, what stood out for you in the findings?
Vàសូមគោរពដល់វេទិកាទាំងមូលហើយប្រជាកិច្ចចាប់ផ្ដើមដំបូងដែរដែលខ្ញុំមានវត្តមានថ្ងៃនេះប៉ុន្តែជាជំនាញដំបូងខ្ញុំសូមជំរាបជូនតទៅនឹងបានណែនាំខ្លួនទីមួយខ្ញុំមកឈ្មោះជីលង្ហួរជានាយករងបច្ចេកទេសនៃវិទ្យាល័យហ៊ុនសែនប្រពន្ធហើយសាលាខ្ញុំនៅមូលដ្ឋាននៅមិននៅទីក្រុងទេគឺនៅជនបទដែរទេហើយនៅស្រុកកធំខេត្តកណ្ដាលមែនតើខ្ញុំចាប់អារម្មណ៍លើបទបង្ហាញទាំង3ប្រទេសកន្លងមកគឺថាមានចំណុចល្អៗជាពិសេសច្រើនដែលអាចខ្ញុំយកធ្វើជាបទពិសោធន៍សម្រាប់ការបទបន្ថែមលើសកម្មភាពដែលខ្ញុំមានស្រាប់ជាទូទៅមកដល់ចំណុចនេះខ្ញុំចាប់អារម្មណ៍មែនទែនទៅលើសំណួរទាក់ទងនឹងតើគណៈគ្រប់គ្រងបានជួយអីដល់ខ្លះដល់គ្រូនៅក្នុងបរិបទសម័យកូវីដនេះឯងមែនទែនទៅសាលាខ្ញុំគឺធនធានបុគ្គលិកគឺមាន72នាក់ដែលនៅក្នុងនោះមានគណៈនាយក4នាក់មានលោកជីវនាជានាយកហើយលោកខ្ញុំជានាយករងហើយនឹងនាយករង2នាក់ទៀតហើយបុគ្គលិកខ្ញុំគឺមានចំនួន72នាក់ហើយស្រី24នាក់ដែលនៅក្នុងនោះគឺមានសិលរហូតដល់1882នាក់អញ្ចឹងគឺលើសលប់ដែរដែលជាការទទួលខុសត្រូវមួយខ្ពស់ដែរនៅក្នុងវិស័យអឺរ៉ុបអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំជួយបាននៅក្នុងបរិបទនេះជាទូទៅសាលាវិទ្យាល័យស្ពៃពូនគឺជាសាលាមួយស្ថិតនៅក្នុងគម្រោងកែលម្អមទុនសិក្សាដែលឲ្យឈ្មោះថាគម្រោងសេពហើយបច្ចុប្បន្នកំពុងធ្វើការជិតស្និទ្ធមែនទែនជាមួយនឹងខាងគម្រោងក៏ដូចជាខាងក្រសួងដែលអាចនិយាយថាជាភ្នាក់ងារមួយសម្រាប់ចម្លងហើយនឹងចូលរួមជួយកិច្ចការងារផ្សេងៗទាក់ទងនឹងការបង្រៀនពីចម្ងាយក៏ដូចជាដោយតាមប្រពៃណីទៅដល់សាលាផ្សេងៗនៅក្នុងដំណាក់កាលនេះគឺថាគណៈគ្រប់គ្រងគឺបានរៀបចំហើយនឹងជួយជំរុញគ្រូជាច្រើនចំណុចដែលខ្ញុំលើកយកមកថ្ងៃនេះគឺទាក់ទងទី1គណៈគ្រប់គ្រងគឺបានញែកណាជាទូទៅបើយើងចង់ជួយគ្នាក្នុងបរិបទកូវីដនេះឲ្យមានដំណើរការនិរន្តរភាពនៃការបង្រៀនគណៈគ្រប់គ្រងត្រូវចាំបាច់ស្គាល់សមត្ថភាពគ្រូដែលអាចប្រើបច្ចេកវិទ្យាបានហើយនឹងមិនអាចបានអញ្ចឹងជាទូទៅសាលាត្រូវកំណត់មុខសញ្ញាតើគ្រូណាដែលគាត់នៅក្នុងស្ថានភាពអាចប្រើបានហើយគ្រូណាខ្លះតែមិនអាចប្រើបានដល់ពេលយើងកំណត់មុខសញ្ញាបានយើងនឹងរកគ្រូឆ្នើមក្រុមគ្រូឆ្នើមដើម្បីជួយគ្រូផ្សេងដទៃឲ្យគាត់មានលទ្ធភាពប្រើប្រាស់បច្ចេកវិទ្យាក្នុងការបង្រៀនពីចម្ងាយបន្ទាប់ពីនឹងទៀតយើងមានការប្រជុំក្នុងបច្ចេកទេសគឺយើងអត់ over ទេគឺបានយើងនៅតែរក្សាដដែលគឺការប្រជុំបច្ចេកទេសនេះហើយតាមក្រុមនេះហើយគឺអាចជួយឲ្យគ្រូមានទឹកចិត្តហើយនឹងបន្តការសកម្មភាពបង្រៀននឹងគឺពេញលេញដោយសារគាត់អាចជួបគ្នាបានព្រោះអ្វីដែលយើងគិតនៅក្នុងពេលនេះគឺយើងគិតបរិបទពីចម្ងាយប៉ុន្តែទូទៅសាលាណាដូចសាលាណាយើងអាចចោលតាមបែបប្រពៃណីដោយផ្ទាល់បានទេព្រោះពេលខ្លះឧបករណ៍សិក្សាគឺសិស្សយើងមានលទ្ធភាពមានដែនកំណត់សិស្សខ្លះគាត់មានឧបករណ៍ប្រើប្រាស់ក្នុងការរៀនពីចម្ងាយហើយសិស្សខ្លះអត់ទេអញ្ចឹងអានេះគឺជាចំណុចដែលគណៈប្រវងត្រូវដឹងហើយនឹងត្រូវតែចូលរួមគិតគូរនឹងមែនទែនជាក់ស្ដែងបរិបទសាលាខ្ញុំគឺអ្នកដែលចូលរួមពីរៀនពីចម្ងាយបានតែ 82% ទេហើយនៅសល់ 10% ជាងទៀតគឺសម្រាប់ការរៀនធម្មតាតាមបែបប្រពៃណីមួយវិញទៀតយើងត្រូវជំរុញហើយនឹងលើកទឹកចិត្តស្មារតីគាត់
We can pause for Mr. Linghor's thoughts right now and move on to our other panelist, Gabby Montenola, who is a Data and Impact Assessment Manager of Teach for the Philippines. Gabby, is there anything from you worked on this report with the rest of the team, so you have very close knowledge of what it says, what the recommendations are. Any thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yes, thank you, Mavi. So what I'll be sharing has to do with having worked on the knowledge product, but also in close collaboration with our training team. Hopefully I can represent Teach for the Philippines in this way. So I want to thank everyone for coming today as we reflect on how each of us in our unique positions influences the larger education system. I know that since 2020, we've had a number of crazy consecutive months, and though the end looks near, I hope from this age of disruption comes the beginning of a new resilient brigade of educators. The position of educators is tricky as the world adapted to the pandemic. Educators had to always be one step faster and know a little bit more with the same lack of visibility. And as always at the ground and the forefront of this effort are teachers. So I'd like to start by diving deeper into our knowledge product qualitative analysis findings of what teachers find helpful in crisis times. So while teachers in Cambodia, Bangladesh, and the Philippines report that they feel more effective, the more training that they receive, the responses also show that the lack of confidence in teaching in the pandemic is not connected to learning a new skill, but rather reconciling with the void that separates students and learnings, and no doubt acting as leaders in the face of this. Being effective in a crisis is more than jumping the hurdle in front of you of new content, new materials, new delivery. It's a paradigm shift in mindset. According to the knowledge product, teachers who rated themselves as more effective mentioned applying a wider range of mindsets than skills. And mindsets also dominated in teachers' reflections about training topics and forms of support. So all of this actually really supports what has been kind of shared and spoken about today. So while the knowledge product lists several key mindsets noted by teachers, the mindset most universal across interviewees was sincere concern and empathy towards students, especially as teachers are now interacting with students in their homes and in their personal spaces. So to elaborate, I would like to share some words from Teach for the Philippines' training manager for human development, Vina. She says, supporting and cultivating our teachers to embrace radical compassion and radical self-care in times of crisis is very critical. Radical compassion is the imperative to fully understand the current reality in order to alleviate the distress and pain of others, namely the students. And radical self-care, which has never been more urgent, is the practice of applying that radical compassion towards the teachers themselves. And once teachers can build and model this inner management system and mindsets themselves, then they're able to usher students into this growth process and cultivate the same mindset as well. Thank you, Vina, for that. Overall, education is a shared effort. And at this point, I would like to share how Teach for the Philippines is committed to this. So Teach for the Philippines specializes in mindset development and community engagement alongside the training of technical skills and knowledge. While it has been established that mindsets are crucial, TFP's training manager, Yona, also notes that we need to make sure, especially for novice teachers, that they have a deep understanding of the basic teaching skills and theories, so we can prepare them to not only deliver the national curriculum, but also be facilitators of authentic instruction and assessment. On top of hundreds of hours of training, Teach for the Philippines also provides systems of continual support, including a dedicated coach and a human development specialist during their 2 years as a teacher fellow or a teacher leader. Results from our annual survey from students, parents, co-teachers, and principals show evidence of support for teacher fellows and teacher leaders, which they in turn provide to the community. They are cited as being a big help to the community and leaders in the pandemic. So overall, just on behalf of TFP, would like to say, hope that this knowledge product and event are helpful, and do reach out to us if you'd like to learn more or work together. Thank you, Mavi, and sorry for speaking quickly.
Thank you so much, Gabby. I loved your note, quoting one of our staff members about radical self-care, radical compassion. I think it's a good insight to end this series of panels today. But before we open it up to further questions, I'd like to loop back to Mr. Bunhing from Cambodia for him to share Linghor's thoughts from earlier.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. So first of all, I would like to say thank you for giving the opportunity to extend my thought from Cambodia. So my name Linghor Chim. I am the vice group leader of the technical team at Sampel Poon High School. So we are based in Koh Tom district, Kandahar province. And having heard from the three countries, this is very interesting to share my experiences teaching as well as facilitating my technical group. Actually, we have we are quite a big school. We have 72 teachers, and out of the 72, we have 29 female teachers teaching around 1,800 students. And in the school, first of all, I would like to inform you that we are implementing the Ministry's Education Safe program. That is to continuing providing education during this pandemic. We try to work with the school management, identifying those who are computer or technology literate, or those who do not feel competent using technology to teach. And then we support those who have less confidence to teach. We also identify those students who are able to access technologies or a smartphone or smart devices, and look for a way to support them. Thank you. លោកគ្រូសូមជើញទៀតគ្រូ
ជាចំណុចបន្តនៅក្នុងចំណុចនោះដែរការគ្រប់គ្រងរបស់គណៈគ្រប់គ្រងទៅដល់គ្រូទីមួយយើងធ្វើបន្ថែមនេះយើងត្រូវផ្ដល់ការលើកចិត្តជាស្មារតីជាប្រចាំតាមស្ថានភាពជាក់ស្ដែងរបស់គ្រូម្នាក់ៗបានថាយើងត្រូវកំណត់មុខសញ្ញាតែគាត់ចំណេះដឹងមូលដ្ឋានរបស់គាត់លើការប្រើប្រាស់បច្ចេកទេសកំណាយើងត្រូវតែលើកចិត្តគាត់បន្ថែមដើម្បីឲ្យគាត់ចូលរួមជាមួយនឹងការសិក្សាបង្រៀនពីថ្ងៃនេះជាមួយគ្នាដែរយើងត្រូវតែ
The management is doing everything to provide mental and other supports to make sure that those who are not able to, are not confident in using technology, they are able to take part in the learning distant learning and teaching process.
ជាមួយគ្នាដែរចំពោះសិស្សសិស្សយើងត្រូវតែមានរៀបចំជាផ្នែកដើម្បីយើងសិក្សាពីស្ថានភាពគាត់តើសិស្សណាដែលគាត់មានឧបករណ៍ប្រើប្រាស់សម្រាប់ការសិក្សាពីចម្ងាយហើយយើងមានជាតារាងលេខឈ្មោះសម្រាប់កំណត់ដើម្បីឲ្យគ្រូនឹងជួយសិស្សតាមទៅដល់ស្ថានភាពចាត់ដែងតន់កាន់ជួយចាត់ដែងតែម្ដង
With students, we also identify those who have access to smart devices and those who don't. So we put them in the different groups so teachers can assist them accordingly.
នៅពេលដែលយើងកំណត់មុខសញ្ញាចំពោះសិស្សដែលគាត់អត់មានឧបករណ៍សម្រាប់ប្រើប្រាស់ក្នុងការបង្រៀនពីចម្ងាយរៀនពីចម្ងាយបានហើយចាប់ផ្ដើមរៀបចំជាមណ្ឌលតាមភូមិតាមមូលដ្ឋានដើម្បីឲ្យយើងងាយស្រួលក្នុងការផ្ដល់ជាសិលកិច្ចការដល់គាត់
So after identifying those who have access and those who don't, we will place them into different groups, and we create different centers in the villages, and then we can start distributing worksheets to them.
បាទជាទូទៅសាលាគម្រោងទាំង100ក៏ដូចជាលើសពី100នៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាដែលមានដឹកនាំដោយអាដាមហងជំរនជារដ្ឋមន្ត្រីក្រសួងអប់រំគាត់បានរៀបចំគ្រប់គ្រងលើកិច្ចការងារការបង្រៀនពីចម្ងាយដោយរៀបចំជាសិលកិច្ចការកម្រិតមួយដើម្បីប្រើប្រាស់ក្នុងការរៀនពីចម្ងាយ
Normally, we have around 100 plus schools nationwide, to implement distant learning in Cambodia in the first phase, led by His Excellency Minister of Education, and we have developed the level 1 of worksheet for the students for the first phase.
ដែលការរៀបចំជាសិលកិច្ចការនេះគឺជួយសិស្សបានច្រើនបំផុតទាក់ទងទាំងការរៀនពីចម្ងាយនិងតាមបែបប្រពៃណីជាក់ស្ដែងការរៀនពីចម្ងាយយើងបានបំលែងសិលកិច្ចការនោះទៅជា Google Form ដើម្បីឲ្យសិស្សសិក្សាការរៀនពីចម្ងាយដោយយើងទម្លាក់តាម Telegram ហើយចំពោះការរៀនបែបប្រពៃណីគឺបានថាយើងផ្ដល់សិលកិច្ចការនឹងឲ្យសិស្សតែម្ដងដោយយើងរៀបចំទៅតាមមណ្ឌលភូមិមួយ
This kind of shift really helped the students, both those who are able to use technology. We convert them into Google Form, so students can get access through Telegram group. For those who enjoy traditional learning, we distribute through the community centers.
នេះគឺជាស្តង់ដារមួយដែលប្រទេសកម្ពុជាបានកំពុងអនុវត្តប៉ុន្តែមិនមែនបានថាយើងចោលកម្មវិធី Google ចោលទេបាន Google Meet ក៏យើងប្រើ Google Classroom ក៏យើងប្រើប៉ុន្តែជាអតិភិបគឺយើងត្រូវកំណត់ការប្រើប្រាស់សិលកិច្ចការជាអតិភិបតែម្ដងក្នុងការសិក្សាពីចម្ងាយក៏ដូចជាដោយផ្ទាល់
So this is the approach that Cambodia is adopting, both traditional way and technological method.
Okay, សិលកិច្ចការនេះគឺបានជួយគ្រូច្រើនបំផុតគឺបានថាយើងផ្ដល់ជាសិលកិច្ចការគាត់ប៉ុន្តែគ្រូនៅតាមផ្ទះគឺជាសៀវភៅសិក្សាគោលដែលយើងមានស្រាប់ដែលបានចែកសិស្សនៅដើមឆ្នាំសិក្សាហើយសៀវភៅសិក្សាគោលនេះឯងគឺជាគ្រូទី1បូកផ្សំជាមួយនឹងអាណាព្យាបាលសិស្សមេត្តាបិតាសិស្សតែម្ដង នៅពេលយើងផ្ដល់សិលការទៅគឺបានថាខ្លឹមសារនៅក្នុងសិលការគឺយើងអាចឆ្លើយតបបានមកវិញគឺដោយសារសៀវភៅសិក្សាគោលអញ្ចឹងបានថាសិលការគឺជាឯកសារមួយដែលជំរុញឲ្យសិស្សនោះគឺសិក្សាលើសៀវភៅសិក្សាគោលនៅក្នុងកម្មវិធីសិក្សារបស់ក្រសួងតែម្ដង
Actually, we already distributed the textbook early of the academic year. So worksheet helps as additional teachers at home, and with the support from parents, students will complete those worksheets and return to the teachers.
គ្រូបង្រៀននឹងទទួលយកកិច្ចការរបស់សិស្សវិញដែលជាសិលការហ្នឹងមកទទួលយកមកវិញដើម្បីពិភាក្សាមើលតើគាត់បានដល់កម្រិតណាហើយយើងនឹងចាប់ផ្ដើមធ្វើការវិនិច្ឆ័យវិតម្លៃជាក់ស្ដែងការវិនិច្ឆ័យនេះគឺយើងទៅលើប្រើប្រាស់ការប្រើប្រាស់សិលការនិងការឆ្លើយតបមកវិញនៅក្នុងខ្លឹមសាររបស់សិលការតែម្ដង
And teachers then will assess the performance of students through their performance, filling in the worksheet, and we know the results of our approach.
បាទជារួមគឺបែរថាការសិក្សាពីចម្ងាយទាំងបែបប្រពៃណីក្នុងបរិបទ COVID នេះគឺយើងមិនអាចចោលបានទេទាំងអាជ្ញាធរមូលដ្ឋានទាំងគ្រូបង្រៀនទាំងខាងអប់រំថ្នាក់លើថ្នាក់ក្រោមគឺត្រូវតែសហការគ្នាទាំងអស់អញ្ចឹងចំណុចនេះហើយគឺយើងជាចំណុចសំខាន់រួមមួយប៉ុន្តែដោយខ្ញុំចង់បង្ហាញថាក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាគឺយើងបានប្រើប្រាស់ប្រព័ន្ធសិក្សាដែលមានស្តង់ដារមួយគឺស្តង់ដារនៃការប្រើប្រាស់សិលការជាគោលដើម្បីធ្វើការបង្រៀនសិស្ស
Of course, this approach, this is indispensable to have a collaboration between parents, students, teachers, and local authorities. And of course, we have implemented the approach that is using the worksheet in Cambodia. Thank you.
បាទជាចុងក្រោយគឺខ្ញុំចង់បញ្ជាក់បន្ថែមទាក់ទងចំណុចនេះដែរអ្វីដែលប្រទេសកម្ពុជាក៏ដូចជាសាលាខ្ញុំកំពុងធ្វើគឺបែរថាប្រមូលសិស្សឲ្យចូលរួមសិនជំហានទី1ទី2យើងនឹងកំណត់ស្តង់ដារបន្តទៀតតើអ្វីដែលយើងធ្វើនឹងពេញលេញបើមិនពេញលេញយើងនឹងបន្ថែមលើចំណុចផ្សេងៗទៀតប៉ុន្តែសិលកិច្ចការកម្រិត1គឺយើងបានកំពុងប្រើហើយយើងក៏កំពុងរៀបចំសិលកិច្ចការកម្រិត2ដែរហើយនឹង3បន្តទៀតដែលយើងកំពុងរៀបចំដែលមាននៅខាងក្រោយគឺខាងប្រធានយោធានខាងយោធានប្រជុំជាអ្នករៀបចំចាត់ចែងបន្ត
Finally, I would like to say that this is first trial, first pilot, and engaging. First, we want to engage with students, draw the participation from students, and then we will improve from level 1 worksheet to level 2 or level 3. We have the director of Department of Secondary Education is in charge preparing those worksheets.
បាទសូមអធិស្ឋានដែរសូមបន្ថែមដែរលើពីនេះដែរគឺអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំដំណើរការបានក្នុងសាលាខ្ញុំក៏ដោយសារតែមានគណៈគ្រប់គ្រងបូកផ្សំជាមួយនឹងបុគ្គលិកសិក្សាទាំងអស់ដែលគាត់បានសហការគ្នាអ្វីនិយាយបែបនេះគឺបែរថាយើងមិនអាចធ្វើបានដោយម្នាក់ឯងបានទេទោះណាតែសហការីឬក៏បុគ្គលិកសិក្សាគាត់ចូលរួមទាំងអស់គ្នាហើយចាត់ស្ដែងនៅសាលាខ្ញុំទាំង72នាក់គាត់បានចូលរួមពេញជើងទាំងអស់គ្នាទៅទោះបីជាគាត់បើមិនមានឧបករណ៍ប្រើប្រាស់ទំនើបសម្រាប់ការរៀនពីចម្ងាយទូរស័ព្ទដៃក៏គាត់ប្រើបានដែរដើម្បីអ្វីដែលគាត់បង្ហាញនេះគឺការចូលរួមមែនទែនអរគុណ
Finally, I would like to stress the great participation from the management as well as teachers, especially in my school. We have 72 teachers. Without participation, so there's nothing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ling Hor, and thank you, Gunhing, for diligently interpreting and translating that for us. I'd like to say before I open it up to questions from the audience, that it's interesting to me how Ling Hor and his school were able to adapt both traditional and innovative methods. And I imagine moving forward from this school year, it's still going to be a hybrid or some version of that. Especially as we talked about earlier in the second panel, like curveballs still do occur. They happen, they surprise us. And so agility is super important in this time. And so thank you for sharing that and being a case study of sorts for how that works and how that could look like in real life. At this point, we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. I'd like to draw a question that we got from the audience. The question goes, since it seems that pandemic measures will still be in place, no face-to-face learning in most cases, what will or what should education institutions do differently given what was learned last year? So in the spirit of, the flexibility that we were talking about, coming up with creative solutions using this data that we found, that we gathered, and all of our learnings from last year, what do you think education institutions, education resource organizations should do differently now that we're entering possibly a second year of a hybrid situation where kids may or may not be able to return to the classroom? Let's start with Dr. Hook. Dr. Hook, any thoughts on that?
the one-size-fit-all modalities will not work. That's what our government is doing. So we need to introduce adaptive learning methodology, and we need to empower our teacher, and we need to ensure teachers' leadership. So I think that is the key.
Thank you. Addie, as Chief Program Officer of Teach for the Philippines, you have any thoughts on this?
I do want to echo what Dr. Hope just said, right? There's no one size fits all solution with what we're going through right now. And I remember, working closely with our program and training team, one principle that we always go back to is to meet the communities where they are. And in this endeavor, right, data is such a powerful tool to help us understand what the barriers and resources are that can be found in the communities and that we can use to make learning accessible for students. And I think finally, trust in the teacher's ability that they will be able to contextualize whatever standardized program, standardized approach we roll out, but making it more meaningful, more relevant because of their understanding and deep relationship with their students and the families that they work with in their school communities. And maybe a final thought for me on the importance, I guess, of mindset developments, right? As Gabby has mentioned earlier, at Teach for the Philippines, we target both hard skills and soft skills. These are equally important skills that we need to develop among our teachers. Hard skills such as the ability to teach in different learning modalities. That's definitely important in ensuring that learning remains accessible to our students, but at the same time, as we've established in the earlier presentations, our teachers are also going through personal challenges. And on top of thinking about, how do they ensure that their students are learning, they're also navigating through personal challenges that they're encountering because of the pandemic. And I think it is important for us to help our teachers, take care of their well-being, make sure that they are also thinking about their own mental health as they try to the best of their ability serve our students in our school communities.
Thank you, Addie. Mr. Linghor, would you like to share some thoughts as someone who manages 72 teachers in your school? What does next year possibly look like for you?
ជាមែនតើទៅអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំកំពុងបន្តនេះគឺបន្តនិរន្តរភាពក្នុងការបង្រៀនឲ្យបានហើយអ្វីដែលយើងកំពុងធ្វើនេះគឺជួយគ្រូឲ្យគាត់ប្រើប្រាស់បានបច្ចេកវិទ្យាហើយនៅបន្តជួយសិស្សដើម្បីជួយសិស្សមុខសញ្ញាដែលគាត់អត់មានឧបករណ៍ក្នុងការប្រើប្រាស់ដោយយើងរៀបចំមានតាមបណ្ដាញតាមភូមិតាមអីខ្ញុំបានជំរាបខាងលើចឹង
Indeed, as I mentioned earlier, we are trying to implement activities to sustain our learning activities, supporting teachers, those who do not have confidence in using technology for distance learning, as well as to support students through the community centers. Yeah.
អ្វីជាចាក់ខុសវិស័យខ្ញុំសម្រាប់ឆ្នាំហ្នឹងដូចឆ្នាំបន្តបើសិនជាបរិបទ COVID នៅតែបន្តខ្ញុំនឹងយកវិស័យអប់រំបូកផ្សំជាមួយនឹងបច្ចេកវិទ្យាបានន័យថាយើងយកបរិបទ COVID គឺជាចំណុចរបត់នៃការប្រើប្រាស់បច្ចេកវិទ្យាជាមួយនឹងការអប់រំគឺតែមួយ
Our vision for next year, or if the crisis continues, we will regard COVID-19 as a turning point, and we will transform ourselves into a new era of education.
ដែលជាចាក់ខុសវិស័យខ្ញុំបន្តសម្រាប់សាលាខ្ញុំបើទោះបីជាបញ្ចប់ COVID ទៅដល់ឆ្នាំក្រោយក៏ខ្ញុំយកពាក់ទងបរិបទនៃការប្រើប្រាស់ការរៀនពីចម្ងាយនេះជួយដល់គ្រូក្នុងការបង្រៀនដែរបែរថាយើងអនុវត្តគោលការណ៍ 30% 40% ហើយនិង 30%
So for my vision, I think even after COVID-19, we will sustain digitalization of our education to support the teachers as well as to support the students. We will stick to the approach 30, 40, and 30.
បែរថាបើទោះជានៅក្នុងថ្នាក់រៀនទោះបីជាអត់មានបរិបទ COVID ក៏យើងអាចប្រើប្រាស់បានដែរការសិក្សាពីចម្ងាយបែរថាគ្រូអាចទម្លាក់សិលកិច្ចការមុនហើយបន្តមកទៀតបាទសិស្សគឺអាចមានឱកាសស្វែងយល់ឬក៏ស្វែងសិក្សាបន្តមកទៀតគឺគ្រូគ្រាន់តែជួយសិស្សក្នុងរយៈពេលតែ 30% ក្នុងការជួយឆ្លើយតបនៅអ្វីដែលគាត់ចេះអញ្ចឹងគោលការណ៍នេះគឺជាចាក់ខុសវិស័យសាលាខ្ញុំនឹងអនុវត្តបន្តទៀតបើករណីថាប បរិបទ COVID បញ្ចប់ឬក៏នៅតែមានក៏យើងអនុវត្តបែបហ្នឹងបាទជាចុងក្រោយខ្ញុំមានប៉ុណ្ណឹងអរគុណច្រើន
I mean, even after COVID-19, distant learning remains. So teachers still distribute worksheets to students, so students are able to review ahead of time, ahead of the session, and then they will give back to teachers. So 30% of the teaching and learning in the future could be distant or digitalized. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, សូមបន្ថែមចំណុចមួយទៀតដែរទាក់ទងនឹងការងារនេះគឺថាខាងខ្ញុំដូចជាសាលាខ្ញុំដូចជាសាលាខ្សែ4ក្នុងទូទាំងប្រទេសគឺបានកំពុងតែរៀបចំការប្រឡងរួមគ្នាហើយតែការប្រឡងគឺបានធ្វើរួចហើយម្ដងហើយគឺក្នុងថ្ងៃទី10ខែមិថុនាហើយយើងនឹងត្រៀមធ្វើនៅចុងខែកក្កដាដើមខែកក្កដាទៀតដើម្បីជំរុញឲ្យសិស្សគឺចូលរួមរៀនបានច្រើនពីទូទៅសាលាខ្ញុំគឺមានការអនុវត្តតេស្តរួមគ្នាណាសាលា44នៅទូទាំងប្រទេសហើយបើមែនតើទៅកន្លងហើយគឺមានការចូលរួមសិស្សរហូតដល់ 31000 អ្នកជាងក្នុងការចូលរួមប្រឡងពីថ្ងៃហ្នឹងឯង
Just to add before I conclude, actually my school and 44 other schools nationwide, we are implementing school assessment through examination, joint examination, and we see that a lot of participation from the students. This is a way to encourage students to take up their study, do not lose their concentration.
តែសកម្មភាពនេះគឺជាសកម្មភាពរុញខ្លាំងបំផុតទាំងសហគមន៍អាជ្ញាធរមូលដ្ឋានមេដាបេដាសិស្សដូចជាសិស្សដែលមិនដែលចូលរួមមុនក៏គាត់ចាប់អារម្មណ៍ឡើងវិញព្រោះជាការប្រឡងមួយដែលធ្វើដែលបង្ហាញពីសមត្ថភាពគាត់ក៏ដូចជាការចូលរួមរបស់សាលាក្នុងការសិក្សាឬក៏សកម្មភាពរៀនបើសិនជាអត់មានសកម្មភាពទេគឺអត់អញ្ចឹងបានថាធ្វើឲ្យផ្ទុះគ្រប់កន្លែងអញ្ចឹងអានេះគឺជាសកម្មភាពមួយដែលសាលាកំពុងធ្វើបាទអរគុណច្រើនជាចុងក្រោយអរគុណមែនទែន
So this requires participation from parents, teachers, local authorities, and all stakeholders to encourage students to come back, to pay more attention in their learning. This is a kind of encouragement, even for those who have forgotten learning for a long time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Linghor and Bunhing, for that. And I guess as closing thoughts, Gabby is someone who works really closely with our teachers in Teach for the Philippines and someone who works directly with the knowledge product. Do you have any final thoughts for how we might bring this to the next school year and what that might look like for us?
Sure. Thank you, Mavi. I really like that the question kind of leaned into this idea of what we learned last year. Something I love that Moni said was education is a long game and it would be very inefficient to reinvent the wheel every single year. So as someone in the data and impact assessment team, I would say lean into what works, but also listen to see how that can be improved. So some things that we've learned at Teach for the Philippines, for example, we found that parents actually enjoy doing workbooks with students, so integrating activities for them to do together. We found that whereas 60% of parents love the amount of check-in time between teachers and parents, 30% actually wanted more. We found that whereas we have this functional literacy program, which teaches basic reading and basic math. We thought it would take 5 hours a week. It actually took 7. We found that parents are really, really engaged, but their number one question is how to help. So I definitely think looking at data, listening to voices, and leaning into what works would be my advice. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Gabby. I guess my only invitation before I wrap this segment up is for our panelists to please go through the Q&A box. There are a number of questions there from our audience. Some are really important ones. There is a question around how do we define learning beyond just the worksheets? How do we develop confidence, empathy, and all those other things that are difficult to measure among our teachers? What are concrete examples of programs that have worked? I think there's a really good opportunity in the Q&A box to provide insight, but also give concrete information to people who may be looking for guidance, how to proceed for the next school year, especially after the chaotic year we've just gone through. But apart from that, I guess the last thing that I want to say is really thank you. I feel a lot of gratitude towards my last set of panelists and all the panelists who have come before. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Deputy Director Hook, Mr. Linghor, Gabby, Addy, and our lovely interpreter. Thank you so much. At this point, I'm turning it over to Angel to hear from the rest of our audience.
Thank you very much, Mavi. Pleasure being with you today. Thank you to our presenter, Adelaide, and to our panelists, Deputy Director Hook, Mr. Linghor, and Gabby from Teach for the Philippines. Mavi, trust, empathy, resilience, and hope. And speaking of hope, we hope that this type of open dialogue enables us to deeply understand the teachers' challenges and needs, especially during a crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic. Together with our partners in the public, private, and civil sector, we hope that the findings we've shared informs the actions we can take together to continue navigating the evolving education landscape for and with our teachers. In support of our endeavors towards accelerating education reform for and with our teachers, we'd like to call on our partner from the Asian Development Bank for a message of support for our education frontliners. Let's all welcome Ms. Shanti Jagannathan.
Hello everyone. On behalf of Asian Development Bank, I warmly welcome you to this virtual event titled Frontlining Education, Exploring Teacher Quality During the COVID-19 Pandemic, hosted by Teach for the Philippines. The title itself evokes the importance of recovery of education and the role of teachers. When education recovers, other parts of the society and economy are also aided. And while teachers have always been important, their role in the current times has become even more critical. With educational institutions remaining closed for such an extended period of time, teachers have become the lifeline for students in their continued learning journey. I want to congratulate Teach for the Philippines for holding this really important knowledge event by bringing together stakeholders from government, from academia and other institutions. The partnership with Teach for Bangladesh and Teach for Cambodia is also very valuable at this time. The Teach for model, I feel like, is a compelling one. It brings together the energy and enthusiasm of young people together with the wisdom and experience of mainstream teachers. ADB is very delighted to partner with Teach for the Philippines in this collective journey of improving teacher quality for better performance by students. It is a collective journey in which many actors have to play a part, and alternative pedagogical models, new approaches to teacher training, leadership training have all become more and more important in recent times. DEPED's own transformational teacher professional development approach will have a very influential role to improve teacher capacities in public school systems. The importance of teachers cannot be overstated. Now, I come from India, and the position of teacher in India is held really high. In the order of priority, first come mother and father, then comes the guru or the teacher, and then comes God. But when we assign such an influential role and such a transformational role to the teacher, we should also be prepared to provide the resources and the support they need to perform their roles effectively and optimally. So let's not forget that while teachers are a lifeline to students, they also need a lifeline in terms of active support and active encouragement and active incentives to perform at their best. So I want to wish all of you very fruitful and productive discussions, and to take forward this dialogue into the future as well. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Shanti. To close out today's forum discussion, we should hear from a voice representing the teachers for whom we dedicate this forum. She has dedicated her life's work to ensure that all public school children benefit from an exclusive, relevant, and excellent education. Let's all welcome Ms. Sabrina Onquico.
Good afternoon to our dear presenters and reactors, fellow teachers, friends, and guests. Thank you to the people behind the study in this forum for your hard work. Doing this study alone sends a message that it is important to look at the experiences of our teachers at this time of the pandemic, to make sense of what we have gone through, to celebrate our strengths, and to reassess how we can do better. From one teacher to another, I'd like to salute our teaching fellows and all the teachers, formal and informal ones, who are listening here today. It has been difficult, but we are still standing. Salute and a hug for doing our best and not giving up on ourselves and our students. This school year, we have experienced the power of our students' contexts. Every student absence, every non-passing of requirements has its own story. If a student's home life is troubled, it also spells trouble for their learning. Before, our classrooms are where we can trump the effect of our students' contexts. In our classrooms, we can give them a conducive learning space. We can immediately detect if they're troubled or if they don't understand the lesson, and we can respond quickly. No matter what their home lives are, when they come in our classrooms, we did our best to give them the love, care, and attention they need and deserve. Now, our classrooms were taken away from us by a virus, and it felt like we were all beginning teachers again, scared, unsure, but did our best to make it work. Teachers are the equivalent of a vaccine to an ailing education system. We are the most effective drivers of change, but we need the tools, the structure, and the support. We cannot demand that teachers be excellent when our conditions make it impossible to be excellent. We need policies that are grounded on our experiences with our students. Teachers can be more compassionate, we can have more wiggle space for flexibility if education policies at a time of COVID-19 are also compassionate and allows us a certain flexibility. We have to move from policies of compliance to policies of compassion. We cannot lose the progress we have done in education over the years to a small virus. We cannot fail a whole generation of students because of a pandemic. There are many things that are still uncertain and many things in which we are still unsure of, but we definitely know better now than when the pandemic started. And as teacher leaders, we will continue leading while learning how to navigate these times. We are defining now how history will remember us teachers at a time of COVID-19. Let's hope that we will be remembered for our courage to make sure that things do not remain as they are, that it gets better because our students' future depends on it. Thank you very much.
Again, we'd like to thank SABS. And as I was saying, I was on mute, apologize for that. Before we end this afternoon's event, we want to hear from you for the last time. We'd like to know how this forum has gone for you on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. There you go. Please let us know how insightful our panel discussions have been for you. Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, please let us know how insightful our panel discussions have been for you today. Thank you very much for your feedback. And if you would like to receive a copy of the full study, please fill out our post-event survey, which we shall share at the end of today's event. Thank you once again to our guest panelists. Thank you to our colleagues from Teach for Bangladesh. Thank you to our colleagues from Teach for Cambodia. Our deepest gratitude to the Asian Development Bank, whose support made this learning engagement possible. Last but definitely not the least, thank you to all of you who spent your Saturday afternoon with us. Thank you for the belief and support of the work that needs to be done for quality education to be accessible in each of our countries. Our teachers' role in this new education context is ever expanding, and in recognizing this and heeding their call for support, we can also ensure our students continue to learn amid and beyond the pandemic. The thank yous are not yet over. Thank you very much, Teach for the Philippines. Once again, I am Angel Jacob. Thank you for the opportunity to be with all of you today. Be well and have a restful weekend ahead.